Welcome to Eternal Christendom, consecrated to Our Lady for the glory of our Lord. I'm Joshua Charles. Just finished a very special interview with a dear friend of mine, Jason Jones. I think it has a lot of deep and fascinating and hard truths for us to consider as we ponder the reality of the great tradition and its wisdom as not just abstract truths that exist in the mind, but as things that require a change of life, a change of heart, a change of action, and a sacrifice to follow, taking up our cross. And so I'm really, really excited for all of you to see it. But before we get into it, I want to give Jason Jones's biography. He's also a member of Eternal Christendom's advisory board, dear friend of mine for about 13 years. So he's got an impressive career, and I wanted you to know about it before we get into it. So Jason is a film producer. He's an author. He's an activist, popular podcast host, and human rights worker. He is president of the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization, which is HERO for short, known for its two main programs, the Vulnerable People Project and Movie to Movement. In 2006, Jason was an executive producer of Bella, which won several film industry awards, most notably the People's Choice Award at the 2006 Toronto International Film Festival. In 2009, Jason was an associate producer of The Stoning of Soraya M., winner of the NAACP Image Award and the Los Angeles Film Festival. In 2009, Jason produced the award-winning pro-life short film Crescendo, one of my absolute favorites. Check it out on YouTube. It's available for free. With Eduardo Verastuggi, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, and Patty Millett, the mother of Justin Bieber. Crescendo raised over $6 million in North America to support pregnancy centers and women's shelters. Jason launched the Vulnerable People Project's Hope for Afghanistan program after receiving a request to rescue a friend's mother trapped in Afghanistan during the U.S. military withdrawal. VPP's Hope for Afghanistan has since grown immensely in the last 2 years. Since the disastrous U.S. withdrawal, VPP has evacuated thousands of religious minorities and former Afghan allies, provided for safe houses in neighboring countries, and worked to resettle vulnerable Afghans. VPP has delivered over 3 million meals to families in need across Afghanistan, opened a women's health clinic, drilled wells that provide potable water to several villages, and provided security for schools so children can study and learn safely. At the heart of everything Jason does is a mission to stand between the violent and the vulnerable, from the child in the womb to Christians in Nigeria, to civilians in Ukraine, to our former allies in Afghanistan, and now civilians in Gaza. His tireless work in the pro-life movement was just recognized in a featured chapter in Legacy of Life, a book honoring 50 of the greatest pro-life leaders of the last 50 years. Jason Jones is a senior contributor to The Stream and the host of The Jason Jones Show. Highly recommend you check it out. It's his podcast. He's also the author of 2 books, The Race to Save Our Century, and his most recent, The World is on Fire, released in October 2017. His latest film, Divided Hearts of America, is now available on Amazon Prime. Jason was the featured speaker at the Life, Dignity, and Victory Summit in Kyiv, Ukraine in 2023. I actually joined him and spoke at the same conference in the midst of wartime Ukraine. It's a very, very interesting experience. You can read more about Jason and his initiatives at www.vulnerablepeopleproject.com. I highly recommend people become patrons of VPP. I am a monthly patron myself. Please support his amazing work. There's a lot of stuff that Jason's has done around the world, Nigeria, Sudan, Gaza, the West Bank, Iraq, the Holy Land, Israel, in different places, Ukraine. I mean, just anywhere where there are people under threat, VPP shows up to help as an example of what the love of Christ is for each of us. The infinite God making himself a child and living as a weak man for our sake to save us. One of the reasons I'm having Jason on is, frankly, to make sure that all this stuff in the great tradition that we talk about, that it doesn't remain just theory. It doesn't remain just abstract for us. This has to be something we embrace with our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole soul, which means taking action, which means living sacrificially. As Catholics, we need to be doing that through prayer, through fasting, through penance on a regular basis. But there are other ways to do it, and many of our co-religionists are having it forced on them around the world through horrific suffering. These are not just abstract truths, whether it's Socrates or our Lord or Old Testament saints or New Testament saints or the martyrs since the foundation of the church. These truths of the great tradition have a cost, and the cost is take up your cross and follow me. And I hope that interviews like what we're doing with Jason today can help all of us, myself included, ponder the ways in which we need to embrace that cross for the sake of not only the salvation of others, but our own salvation. And with that, let's get into the interview with Jason Jones. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to thank Eternal Christendom's patrons. You are making it possible for us to produce beautiful, substantive content that we can share with the world for free. If you've been blessed by Eternal Christendom's content but are not yet a patron, please check out our website, eternalchristendom.com, and click Become a Patron at the top right of our homepage, where you'll find 6 ways to give, including online. We have a big vision, but we need your help to make it happen. This podcast is just the beginning. That's our hope, at least. Since we are a nonprofit, all your donations are tax deductible. If a relatively small number of Catholics become monthly patrons for only $10 a month, that's a coffee and a bagel, we will be on solid ground for the long game. If you can give more, even better. Thank you again for your support. Now to our episode. All right, Jason, welcome to the Eternal Christendom podcast. This has been a long time coming, and you and I have a lot to talk about, and I'm hoping this is the first of many. So welcome.
Well, it's my favorite podcast. I'm not just saying that. I think you know that. So.
Yeah, besides the Jason Jones show, right?
This will be my
Which
least
people need to
episode.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. That you have a lot of powerful things to say. And, people have heard a bit of your background, but a big reason I'm having you on, Eternal Christendom doesn't normally do news commentary. And this interview isn't primarily about news commentary, but you'll be talking about things that are in the news a bit. And but the primary reason I'm having you on is because you, in my opinion, we've known each other for 13 years, something like that. We've traveled to a few places, including Ukraine. We were in Ukraine together the summer of 2023. So we saw a lot of, blown up buildings, some very severely injured soldiers, some horrific things. And so but the reason for having you on is you, in my opinion, you exemplify the great tradition extremely well. And so, the great tradition that we talk about, these sources, the church fathers, the saints, the great philosophers like Plato, Socrates, etc. They're talking about things that can sometimes feel abstract, and I feel someone like you helps make it very, very concrete. That these things, Socrates wasn't just some nice guy spouting platitudes; he died for what he believed in. Our Lord Jesus Christ was not some guy who preached love and tolerance, and people are like, oh, that's simple, and it's like, no, they crucified him as Plato, prophesied, so to speak. So that's why you're on, because your life embodies in many ways the great tradition in a very radical way, and I think people need to hear about that. So again, we're honored to have you.
Well, that's very kind, Joshua, especially coming from you. It's great to be on your show.
Well, before we get going, we'll do a quick prayer, and then your patron saint is St. Maximilian Kolbe, which makes perfect sense. And mine is St. Ignatius of Antioch, so we'll ask for their prayers as well as the prayers of the guardian angels of everybody listening, as well as yours and mine. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. St. Ignatius of Antioch, pray for us.
Pray for us.
Holy guardian angels of everybody listening, and Jason and I, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so I think there's an interesting bookend of your life right now in terms of how you became a Christian, originally Protestant, then Catholic, but it kind of was through abortion, which, you'll tell that story, but then we're going to also talk a bit about what's happening in Gaza today. So it's like on both ends, there's a sort of murderous situation that you're confronting. And so, I'll leave it at that, and you can start telling your story.
Well, actually, Josh, I was an atheist before I was evangelical. And, this week in Gaza, our organization, the Vulnerable People Project, is delivering thousands of cans of baby formula. And on the baby formula, it says, from the child in the womb to the child in Gaza. And that sort of sums up our apostolate, at the Vulnerable People Project, and sort of my work since I was really 16 years old when it started for me. My high school girlfriend rode her bicycle like 5 miles to my house on a Saturday morning, the day after a football game. So I was in bed, sore, my shoulder pads and equipment strewn on the floor. And she rode her bike to my house, and came up the steps and woke me up with the words, "I'm pregnant." And the two of us sort of spent that day trying to figure out what we would do. And I had a friend that just joined the Army, and I actually tried to talk him out of it. And he said, "No, there's this program. If you're 17, you can go in. You just need to pass the GED and you can leave right away." And I thought that was the worst idea I ever heard. And at that time, I was dreaming of college football in the NFL. But now our circumstances changed. And so the plan was I would join the Army, and my high school girlfriend would wear baggy sweaters till I came back from basic training, and we would tell her parents. Not the best plan.
No.
But 2 days later, I turned 17, and on my birthday, I went down to the recruiting office, and it was a program at the time for kind of troubled youth. I was almost overqualified for the program, but I did get in and was quickly off to reception center in Fort Benning, Georgia. While I was in basic training, obviously her father found out she was pregnant and took her to get a forced third trimester abortion. Growing up with no religion and not really thinking about politics in my home, my mom had me when she was 16. Really, the first time that I even thought about abortion or really understood that it was a reality was when I found out my child was destroyed in the beginning of the third trimester by a forced abortion. And then as a young infantryman, you know, I just really had this commitment I wanted to order my life to defend the vulnerable from the violence, from the child in the womb to the child in Darfur. And I had read in 1995, I got out of the Army and I went to the University of Hawaii. I was a hardcore atheist. I was an Ayn Rand objectivist. But I was an admirer I discovered Francis Schaeffer, the Presbyterian theologian and philosopher, and he really impressed me. He wrote a book on abortion with C. Everett Koop. And, I somehow ended up reading The Gospel of Life by St. John Paul the Great and other encyclicals. And just around the time at the end of my undergraduate work as a hardcore Ayn Rand objectivist, my passionate study for the roots of human dignity, studying anthropology and philosophy, it was right around the time I was losing any hope for any sense of human dignity. I discovered these great thinkers that helped me understand that what our founding fathers, something you know a lot about, saw as self-evident. A self-evident truth really wasn't a self-evident truth. I mean, it is. Human beings are self-evidently mesmerizing and beautiful and captivating, but the truth about our dignity was revealed when the second person of the Trinity became incarnate in the womb of a young woman in Bethlehem. And it was Christian anthropology. It was actually Sartre and Freud and Nietzsche that helped me kind of understand this. Maybe 10 years ago, I wrote my conversion story for National Review, and it was called Finding God in the Mirror, how Roe v. Wade, Ayn Rand, and Sartre led me to believe in God. Because Sartre did a great job of helping me understand that this wasn't obviously his intent, but helping me understand that the idea of human dignity and human rights comes from the Christian understanding of the human person. And then I had kind of hit a crisis.
So could we back up a little bit? You had told me a very powerful story in this sort of abortion situation with your ex-girlfriend about being on the phone with her father. Can you tell the audience about that? And then we'll get into what objectivism is, Ayn Rand, etc.
Yeah, I didn't go to church with the other soldiers. So on Sundays when the other soldiers went to church, I was adamant, I would clean pots and pans. I had pots and pans detail. So I was on detail when a young man who had it's called desk duty. They stand in the front of the barracks and answer the phone and the CQ desk, and the payphone in front that I would call her from, she called that payphone. He answered it. He ran out and got me and said, "Your girlfriend's on the phone crying." She couldn't even talk. Her father grabbed the phone and said, "I know your secret and it's gone. You can come home now. I took her to get an abortion."
Wow.
And then a drill sergeant hung up the phone. I ended up hitting the drill sergeant. I was always blessed with a very understanding chain of command because I was always getting in kinds of really bad trouble. And it's miraculous I was never kicked out. But my captain gave me a roll of quarters. When I explained to him what happened, he said, "Go to the PX and call your girlfriend." And I called her. He said, "You go comfort her." And I just listened to her cry through a roll of quarters
Mm.
until the phone went dead.
Wow.
Yeah. And I often think that it was her wailing that communicated to me the truth about abortion. I wonder what would have happened if she called me and said, you know what, you're young, I'm young, and we have our lives ahead of us. I went to Planned Parenthood and I'm not pregnant anymore. I might have just been, and I don't know how, I don't think I would have been launched on this campaign to end abortion. But the way she wailed, just her, like as if her soul was crying, and then on a pay, for an entire roll of quarters, and in those days it was probably 90 minutes. I couldn't get in a word in, and she just wailed for 90 minutes.
Wow.
And that really communicated the truth of abortion to me. Sometimes our experiences can lead us to things that aren't true, right? But at that moment, she really communicated the truth of what abortion is to me.
Wow. And you were still atheist at the time.
Well, I was kind of brackish then. My grandfather was the only real religious person in my life, quote unquote religious. And he was a Scientologist from the early, like the beginning days of all things.
Sure.
And I didn't even know my father's dad was Catholic. And my father's mother was Episcopalian. I didn't even know that any of that till the funerals. It's not like religion or church. I'd never darkened the door of a church except for a funeral or wedding.
So, and you at this time, when did you? I remember you telling me this resolution you had to bring Roe v. Wade in particular to an end, to do all you could to bring it to an end.
Yeah, I do want to make it clear, though, my militant atheism began with the abortion. At the same time, my commitment to be pro-life. I had read Ayn Rand. I'd read Anthem in junior high, along with Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. Those two books had a really big impact on me. A short story and a novella had a big impact on me. Started reading a lot of Ayn Rand, not really understanding it. I was young and last in my class in high school, so I wasn't, a gifted student. But I was a bibliomaniac, and I always was reading and living in books. And I kind of, after the abortion, my high school girlfriend's father was a very prominent Catholic in the Chicago area.
Very prominent Catholic?
Very prominent. His best friend was Cardinal Bernardine.
And he was the one who had his daughter get a forced abortion?
At Chicago Masonic Hospital, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that detail. At a Chicago Masonic Hospital, wow.
They had a very big extended family. At the time, I really looked up to them. It seemed very ordered. It was, obviously I discovered there was severe dysfunction in my high, even though we were from different sides of the track, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
She had it much worse than me as a child. But from my vantage point as a young boy, it was probably the first wealthy person that I had ever met. And, he would be in a 3-piece suit on a Friday afternoon when I came by his house, and he had a big, beautiful office, and they had stables and a lake, and they were very wealthy. And so I admired him greatly. And even I think he liked me, when I was on the cover of the local newspaper for football. He bought every newspaper in town and brought them home. And but it was that really was scandalous to me. So I became like a militant atheist. My commitment to ending abortion and my militant atheism was birthed at the same exact minute. And I'm grateful that it was Ayn Rand that it was attractive to me. Because
Tell us about Ayn Rand, because there may be some audience members who don't know who she is or what objectivism is,
Yeah, Ayn Rand is a lot of conservatives who go through a quote unquote Ayn Rand phase, and then they spend the rest of their life bashing her. I would never do that. I still greatly admire her. She was definitely an odd duck. She was an odd duck. But she was Jewish from Russia. Her family had suffered under the pogroms prior to the revolution. And then obviously under the Bolsheviks, her family being upper middle class suffered brutally at the hands of the Bolsheviks. So she was really repulsed by any ideology of quote unquote altruism, and so
Which she defined how? How did she define that?
She would believe in what she called the virtue of selfishness. And that was really an impulse that, anyone that talked about altruism was either launching a pogrom on her community or the Bolsheviks were trying to murder her whole neighborhood. So I completely understand where she comes from. And she was very courageous in the 30s in Hollywood as this young Russian emigre in Hollywood, standing up to the communists, standing up to Stalin at great risk to herself. So she was very brave. Her writing became very, I believe, contrived. Like, even when I was a hardcore Randian, Atlas Shrugged was my least favorite of her writings. And the younger she was, the more I adored it. Like, I loved We the Living and Anthem, and I loved her unpublished short stories. I really even loved Fountainhead. But by the time we get to Atlas Shrugged, even when I founded the Ayn Rand Society of Hawaii Pacific University, and I still never really liked Atlas Shrugged. I'm in the movie Atlas Shrugged. I have a little cameo with Andrew Breitbart.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, Andrew Breitbart and I and my daughter play the mayor's aides.
Okay.
At James Taggart's party, of all things.
Oh, okay. But I need to go see that.
Yeah, so for me, I was conservative. I mean, you could say I had this impulse to the right, kind of a libertarian, objectivist impulse. So Ayn Rand and Kurt Vonnegut, Harrison Bergeron was something else that is a young person, really influenced me.
Can I clarify one thing with Ayn Rand? So altruism for her, correct me if I'm wrong, it would have been like a sort of do-goodism on the part of somebody who's trying to remake society in their own image. Like, that's what she associated it with, correct?
Wokeism, what we would call wokeism, yeah. Or do-goodism. Or
So the Bolsheviks, they're trying to completely redesign society in the name of a greater good, which is not selfish, quote unquote. So therefore her proposing of the virtue of selfishness, quote unquote, as an alternative.
Yes.
Am I getting that right?
Rand,
okay.
Yeah. And the one, but and that being said, the one thing Ayn Rand had that really is attractive to me, and even in her writings, is she did have this like exalted vision of the human person. If you even see the covers of her books,
yeah,
they're it's almost, she was much more influenced by Nietzsche than I understood at the time. I rejected that and would be offended by that when I was a Randian.
Sure.
But that she, as a boy, I was always mesmerized by human beings. That's why I called my my conversion story for National Review Finding God in the Mirror. I would go to like train stations and I would like sit across the street and get a Coca-Cola and just watch people leaving from work. And then I would think, like, where were they working and where are they from and who built the train tracks and where were those immigrants from and where did the gravel come and where were those migrants from and what boats did they come? And I would just sit there in almost an ecstatic state, mesmerized by human beings. And Ayn Rand most definitely had that. Tragically, the scandal of of the pogroms and other things really, she was, there was sort of this almost impossible barrier between her and religion, whether Christianity or even her own Judaism. But yet she had that Jewish understanding of the human person made in the image and likeness of God, but to the point of like, we would almost be godlike ourselves,
Yeah. Yeah. And then you mentioned a few other thinkers, Kurt Vonnegut, whatnot. Could you explain what their influence was?
Yeah, well, Harrison Bergeron, I think everyone probably read that in junior high. And
I didn't actually. I've never even, I never even heard of it when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. I got to go back. And I must have had the best junior high teachers because, but it's just about a dystopian society in the future where if you're athletic, you have to wear sandbags. If your vision is good, you have to wear glasses. If you're really smart, you have to wear little devices in your ear that disturb you so your intelligence is an advantage. And there's this character, Harrison, who is, the more they burden him, the stronger he becomes. The more weights they put on him, the stronger he becomes. The more, the thicker the glasses to distort his vision, the better his vision becomes, till he breaks his chains and goes to a dance studio where the beautiful women have to wear masks and they have to be weighed down so they can't dance as well as others. And he breaks her chains. He takes off her mask and they do a beautiful dance. They kiss and then he's shot dead. And when I read that as a boy, I felt really oppressed by my public school. I remember thinking, I am Harrison Bergeron,
Yeah.
I am here. So, yeah.
Although there's some truth to that. And maybe this will be a through line for some of our talk, but you know, when you read the church fathers, I was reading some sermons on almsgiving recently, and they were saying that one of the reasons there are poor people in this world is to give rich people the opportunity to get to heaven. Very interesting thought. And this idea that the rich are given their gifts. Like the father saw riches as a form of gift that needed to be given away in a certain way, or gifted to others in a certain way. They also saw poverty as a kind of gift, you know, because there's a sort of, you know, if you're going to endure poverty, that you in a edifying way, you have to sort of detach yourself from worldly goods, which is the ultimate preparation for heaven. And so there's this sort of approach of like whatever gifts God gives us, we're called to give away in a certain way. Whereas, you know, the dystopian vision you're describing, which sounds eerily similar to, you know, many ideologies we've all had to experience the last, you know, 15, 20, 30 years, especially lately, is like your gifts need to be put under a basket, or there's like a sort of envy and resentment that is how you look at gifts, as opposed to an opportunity to give of oneself. So just an interesting contrast between the Christian worldview and the non-Christian worldview.
Yeah, definitely.
So what was next? You're still an atheist, but then you're encountering, you know, let's go through that National Review article, I guess. You got Ayn Rand, Vonnegut. You know, how does this lead you to Christianity?
Well, you know, I'm going to the University of Hawaii. I founded the Pro-Life Student Union. I'm an atheist. I have my Ayn Rand club at Hawaii Pacific. You know, it was another school. There were a lot of Scandinavian students that were at Hawaii Pacific University that adored Ayn Rand. So we had our little club at HPU. I had my pro-life club at the University of Hawaii. I was taking classes at both schools. And, you know, right around that time, I was, you know, passionately pro-life. As a soldier, I'd written a 40-year plan on how to order my life to be useful to ending abortion in America. And I had all this,
like every young person, you know, just that's what every young person does.
Yeah. No, my captain actually told me to do it. He said, "What's your plan?" I was going door to door talking to civilians about abortion as an infantryman on my days off.
Wow.
And he said, "You need to write a plan. Start with your goal, work your way back, give yourself 40 years.
Wow.
It's going to take a lifetime."
Good commander.
And so I went and did that, you know, and so I started backwards. I knew my goals. My goals were to get near positions of power and influence power in the service of defending the vulnerable. And I had to you know, write books, make movies, run political campaigns. But of course, I was a high school dropout. The first thing I needed was a college degree. So there I was at the University of Hawaii. And it was a charmed time for me. You know, I lived in the library. I was very active in clubs. I worked as well. So I was working the whole time. But you know, it was just a really charmed time. But I was not satisfied with Ayn Rand's Anthropology. You know, I just felt that she would say, well, human dignity is self-evident, it's axiomatic. And that wasn't enough for me. And I read everything and anyone I could to try to understand Nietzsche, Freud, Sartre, actually putting off revealed religious truth to the very end. And it was in Existentialism and Education, when there was a paragraph where Sartre basically said the vision of the human person in the West and the rights that derive from that vision, it's a myth. It's Christian mythology, Christian anthropology.
So who is Sartre? Let's tell people. Sorry to interrupt, but just so again, for audience members who don't know who this is, who is Sartre? And
he was an existentialist, a Stalinist.
Yeah,
you know, very influential thinker, and in many ways, like Nietzsche, brutally honest. Like I'm really grateful for Nietzsche, and I'm really grateful for Sartre and Camus, who is a much more humane human being. And Sartre always repulsed me. And I think I may have even been reading him for a class. I don't even think it was like I wanted to read him. But you know, they take things to their conclusions bravely.
Yes. Yeah.
And where Ayn Rand sort of didn't, you know. So Nietzsche and Sartre kind of kept going to the logical conclusion of there being no God. And I just assented, as strange as it sounds. At that moment, I believed in God. And I read the Quran and the Jewish scriptures. I wouldn't even read the New Testament. I was so prejudiced against Christians. I would go to the local mosque by my university, which I loved doing because it was very cerebral and very manly. So you'd go in and you'd be in a rectangle shaped room with a bunch of guys from all over the world, and they'd be peppering me with philosophical and theological questions. And here I am, just an atheist boy, you know? And my mentor at the time was Jewish. So I was reading the Jewish scriptures and talking to him. And then he surprised me by saying, well, I'm Jewish, but I do believe Jesus is our Messiah. And that was Representative Mark Moses, who was my mentor. But he wouldn't go to church. He didn't go to synagogue, but Jesus is my Messiah. Don't call him Christian. He's like, I'm not Christian. I'm Jewish, and Jesus is my Messiah. He wasn't a Messianic Jew. When I tried to send his son to get his bar mitzvah to Messianic community, that was the only time he almost fired me. And I once tackled a constituent and dropped him on his head, and he didn't fire me for that. Because he took down my boss's Star of David, and I lost my temper. It was
interesting. Why do you think he was so sensitive about this?
I don't know, man. He was the best human being I've ever met.
Like Jewish
thinking about him. He died of lupus. Pardon?
Like cultural pressure from fellow Jews,
no,
maybe?
He didn't care about cultural pressure at all. No, he was just an old-time guy, an old Marine. Just an old Marine, just hardworking. This guy was on his, we thought he was going to die. He had lupus. We were Tripler Army Medical Hospital, and he would make me read every bill, and he would read every bill. Every bill. We're talking like over 1,000 bills.
Wow.
And then he would ask, we would go over them bill by bill and how I would vote, how he would vote. And then if we agreed, we would move along. If we disagreed, we would discuss it. And he had me bring legislation to the hospital where the doctor told me he was going to die. I don't know what, some count of something, T cells or not, I don't know what, for lupus was like non-existent. And I remember saying to him at the time, Rep Moses, I said, now I know why God gave the law to the Jews.
Yeah.
And how you got the name Moses, because you take these bills really serious. And he's like, I'm not going to, he's like, he can't even move. He's like, I'm not going to die. And he went on to live, another 20 years.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it wasn't anything. When he went on a trip, like one of these APAC trips to the Holy Land, he shocked everyone by wanting to walk the way of the cross instead of going to the Wailing Wall.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So when the other
kind of a head nod there.
Pardon me?
Maybe a head nod there.
Yeah, he is just a beautiful.
Excuse me.
He was just a beautiful, brave, hardworking, dignified human being. Yeah, and so I really respected him. I read Isaiah.
Sorry, I had a big sneeze there.
No, that's okay. I read Isaiah 53 to him.
What was that?
This is when I finally decided to read the Bible.
Okay.
That was like, it was a gotcha moment.
Okay.
And I read it to him. And where's that from? And he goes, it's Isaiah 53. Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then why don't you accept Jesus as the Messiah? And that's when he said, I do. No, Jesus is the Messiah. And that's when I finally read the New Testament. And that's when I was blown away. To be honest, I was just taken way aback by the New Testament.
I want to get to that. Before we do, let's go back really quick to Nietzsche and Sartre. I don't think most people realize that when, Nietzsche is the source of the quote, God is dead.
Yeah.
But he didn't mean it in like a triumphalistic sense, as you know.
Yeah.
Why don't you, I guess if you could unpack that a little bit for us, only because I'm curious what you thought then and maybe after, that was 30 years ago roughly. So in light of all your study, in light of all your experience, what you thought then and what you think now is at the root. Because I agree with you, thinkers like Nietzsche and Sartre were very honest about the implications of their beliefs and realities they saw, which is why I think they're valuable as thinkers. So like, what was at the root of their conclusions? Was it despair? Was it hatred of God? Like, what was it, you think?
For me, and I can't speak for them, but I realized I was never an atheist, but I was just an anti-theist.
Okay.
I realized I always believed in God, and I started thinking back to it earlier in my life. I remember my first 2 prayers as a boy. One was to God and one was to the devil, actually.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was more of a challenge to the devil, but and then I realized I was just upset that life isn't a bed of roses. And I think a lot of atheism is just anger at God, which is really just anger, which is misplaced anger at our family, the human family's misuse of free will. But
That's very
I
good.
think I was angry. Nietzsche, there's some psychological, his childhood and other things. But I do think there could be, when people suffer pain, one maybe could be driven to a profound belief in atheism, I believe, or at least even if it's an anti-theism, they don't even communicate to themselves. They really do believe it's an atheism, that they think they're, you're not there, God. You're not real. I don't believe in you. And but they were honest at what it meant. And I do like these spiritual exercises where I'll go through different theologies and try to think of God, man, in the world through the lens of a Hindu, through a Muslim, a Yazidi, a Protestant, God forbid. And I really think that if I were an atheist today, I would be a transhumanist, right? That's the Luciferian thrill of transhumanism. That if one truly doesn't believe there's a God, then there should be. So then why not us?
Yeah.
Right. So I think
boy, that's creepy when you frame it that way.
Right. But I think that's sort of an embryonic, Nietzsche's Antichrist. I do think maybe there's this desire that there should be a God, and if there isn't. But for me, I really do believe I had this immediate assent to there's a God. Immediate.
Okay.
I was reading Sartre, I just like there's a God. And I didn't want it to be Christianity, to be blunt, because I was a young man living in Hawaii, and I was really comfortable with Ayn Rand's ethics when it came to human relationships, right?
Yeah, sure.
If they're consensual, da-da-da.
Sure.
Even though my own life was proof that was nonsense, because I was like a wrecking ball in the lives of, good young women. With my sort of cavalier Randian philosophy.
Yeah.
But that was something that really was, believe it or not, like the big pull then in my late 20s was there needs to be a transcendent point in which we fix the moral order, and that without a creator, Sartre is right. Like human rights are meaningless and human beings are worthless.
It reminds me of
I think it's a human person is just a match dropped into the ocean of the abyss, and
wow.
But I didn't want that to be true. But equally, I didn't want to change my behavior. It's as strange as it sounds. It was like those were the two battles. And then I was, struggling with theology and philosophy. But the real battle was between the desire for a transcendent moral order and an anthropology that could explain the inviolable dignity of the human person that I had been advocating for on the one hand, and on the other hand, I wanted to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation I had in high school, because I was in high school in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And there was a lot of debate about moral relativism versus moral absolutes. And I, of course, was taking the position that morals are absolute. They're not just opinion. And so we're responsible to a moral law. But I got some of my atheist high school friends to basically admit that if their position that morals are relative and a matter of opinion, if that was correct, then they couldn't say that what happened in the Holocaust or some other great tragedy was evil or wrong. They could only say, I don't prefer that happen. And they had the honesty to admit that was true, which was shocking to me. And I was like, well, what else is there to say then? I say those things are wrong and evil. You say they're contrary to your preference. We'll see which one beats it. And so that, I don't know if you had any experiences like that where it was in light of where we are now in 2025. It's just interesting to me how deep the nihilism was even then. I think it's been in our culture far more deeply than people realize, and we're seeing a lot of fruit of that now in many ways.
Well, it's in Ecclesiastes. It's the human condition, and I think we all go through that, and that's why we have to be Christ in the world.
So you get to the New Testament. Tell us what that was like and what that ended up doing.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was really just a clown. I would always debate and harass the Christians on campus, and even though I founded the College Republicans, I was really obnoxious. And they would be a little obnoxious too. I remember once I was having a pro-life event on campus, and the local like evangelical group leader came over to chastise me for being judgmental,
Funny.
by simply having a pro-life event on campus. And
wow.
And I said, well, who told you shouldn't judge? This was my cliche. He's like, Jesus. I said, Jesus said you shouldn't judge. Well, that's the fallacy of the stolen concept. He surely should just take Logic 101. It said, and then I remember reading that that's not what it said at all. I remember reading, don't you know, in Romans, don't you know you'll judge the angels in the world? How much more should you judge the things of this world? Don't judge like a hypocrite. Take the board out of your own eye and then the speck out of your brother's eye. There was none of this just like, don't judge. By the way, it's, saying don't judge is the fallacy of the stolen concept. That's, you're making a judgment. You can't, you can't say that.
Yeah.
So I had all these, my grandpa would always say, he was a Scientologist, Catholics are stupid. I'm sorry, Catholics are evil, Protestants are stupid. And another one of his lines was, Christians will say there, but before the grace of God go I. And then my grandpa would list his horrible life, which was horrible. He had no teeth by the time he was 17 because his mother, my great grandmother, had been married 7 times, and he would get beat. He would get beat so bad. He was the strongest but most violent man you'd ever meet.
Wow.
And and I could always forgive him because I understood there, but before the grace of God go I understood his childhood, even though he was a very violent guy. But he would always say, "Oh, there, but before the grace of God go I," is a line that Christians say. And because they don't want to take personal accountability for themselves. And I had a lot of these, my grandpa's kind of Scientology cliches and just cultural cliches against Christianity, then my own prejudice. So I was not really eager to read the Bible. And then I read the Gospels, and it was really like Paul's letters that just captivated me. And then also that the idea, and I had a professor at the time, really well-known historian of Middle Eastern history, but he was a German professor. And he always said, well, as an anthropologist, what I find most fascinating about Christianity, and almost like, he must have read Girard, I guess, I don't know, but he would say it's the one religion where the God sacrifices for man, and the God sacrifices and suffers for the human person. And he's like, I'm an atheist, but that fascinates me. And that did fascinate me. And Paul's letters fascinated me, and John's letters. And it wasn't what I had expected. And I remember being kind of angry. Why didn't the chaplains, when I was in the army, like all this time that I had wasted, why didn't chaplains talk to me? Or why don't Christians explain? And there was a evangelical TV show at the time called Bob Enyart Live, and I discovered Bob Enyart. He was really pro-life and kind of, edgy. And incendiary, but he would always kind of fight against moral relativism. And I had been reading Francis Schaeffer already. That's when I kind of assented to the truth of Christianity, but I didn't know really what church I should go to. And I had a Baptist friend who literally said, "We are the one true church."
Man.
But I had a friend, her name was Jan Judd, and she had been married to Senator Judd. She'd been
from what
second
state?
wife in Hawaii.
Hawaii, okay.
And he had been a state senator from a very prominent family, one of the prominent families of Hawaii. And he introduced the first bill to legalize abortion in Hawaii. She had wanted to undo that legacy, his wife, and she was very old. Okay. We became very good friends, and she was Episcopalian. And I told her, I really think I believe in God and Christianity. And she had one of those voices, like she smoked a lot and drank a lot of whiskey and played bridge. She'd say, "Jason, I'm going to bring you to church." So I thought I was going to go to this nice Episcopalian church. Well, we went to a Calvary Chapel, and they were very pro-life. And so I started going there, so that was really my first ecclesial community, was Calvary Chapel, Honolulu. And I loved them. And I started listening to J. Vernon McGee's The Bible Bus.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started doing a Bible study at a bar in Hawaii, which was a little. Have I told you about this before?
Sounds very Jesus-like, going with the prostitutes and the tax collectors.
Literally.
Yeah.
So in Waikiki, there are pimps and prostitutes and street performers. And there was this bar called Spinners, and I would just go buy pitchers of beer. And at the time, I was director of Hawaii Right to Life, or assistant director. And the director at the time Andy Blum was coming over. He played a big part in my conversion too. He'd always feed me books. But Andy Blum lived on Maui, and he needed to stay at my apartment. I said, well, I got to go to a birthday party at Spinner's where I do my beer and Bible with Jason. And it really was, I wasn't teaching. We would just read the Bible. Prostitutes, street performers, pimps. So then I asked Andy, Andy's like, can I come to the birthday party? I was like, well,
was he coming for religious reasons or fleshy reasons?
And he loved it. No, yeah. It wasn't like that. I worked as a waiter there, and I knew every homeless person. I knew everybody on that street, for 12 years, I walked up and down that street every day. So I knew everybody, and I would just invite everyone. And to this little bar, and different people would come. There's this one guy, he was the silver man, dressed up like a robot from Hungary.
Oh, yeah.
Attila. Yeah. He would come, and it was, that's how it started for me. And my behavior was unchanged, still drank a lot. And I would go out drinking and then come home and just lie in my bed in Waikiki. Now, all this time, I'm chief of staff for state rep, chairman of the Young Republicans, speaking at churches. But I'm just, I'm kind of brackish, like kind of believe this. I want to believe this. I'm going to this Calvary Chapel church. They were the most charming, wonderful people. I was surrounded by great Christians, like this elderly woman from an iconic family, and working for Right to Life. And that's what was happening. Yeah.
One of the great joys of doing these interviews with, usually I know the people to a certain degree or not or other. And you and I have known each other for a long time. We know each other quite well. There's all these little details you find out about their story. So I want to probe into some of them a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
So it is interesting about suffering, because I think that is the issue. I don't think there are any plausible arguments against the existence of God, except, at least on an emotional level, suffering. And I made a comment to my fellow White House speechwriters. All of us were converts to the Catholic faith. And this was in 2020. And I jokingly said, the thing that sucks about being Catholic? They said, what? I said, we can't complain about suffering anymore. And it reminded me of, I'm reminded often, I don't consider him, and I don't think he considers himself an exemplary Catholic, but Stephen Colbert. He had this amazing interview with Anderson Cooper. Have you seen this interview where he's asked about, well, he had his family died, a good chunk of his family died in a car accident when he was younger. I believe that's what happened. And Anderson Cooper quoted Colbert, who was apparently quoting Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings, saying, what punishments of God are not gifts? And Anderson Cooper was like choking up at this. And he basically said, do you really believe that? And Colbert, very plaintively, but with, I must say, a very sincere sense of joy. I'm not his biggest fan many times, but I was struck by this interview, and I think he was giving an authentically Catholic witness in this interview. And he said, yes, I do believe that. Life is a gift. All of it, both the good and the bad. And he said later on that the thing about the Catholic faith that he found so convincing was that it says that God does it too. The suffering. God does it too. So you're not alone. And so I don't even know. I kind of just want your response to any of that, and how you were discovering this, because it seems like Sartre and Nietzsche are looking at, the suffering of life. And there's a sort of resentment. And I think this is where Jordan Peterson, you and I think are mutually frustrated. He hasn't gone a bit further with some of his conclusions. But I think this is one of his great, great points that has actually helped bring many people back to at least some form of theism, but particularly Christianity, is that there is this fundamentally Cain-like approach to life where you can see, your brother offer a better sacrifice and be better at something else, or which is a minor suffering compared to what's possible. And you resent existence itself. Or there's the Abel approach to life, or the Abraham approach to life, or the Moses approach to life, obviously the Christ approach to life, where you not only accept the suffering, but it becomes a source of greatness, a source of holiness. And final thought I'll put on the table, and I just want your general reflections on this, because I know you think about this a lot. And I also want to get to Girard, like when you encounter Girard, because I know that's a big part of your thought now and your action. But it's interesting to me that it seems like in many poorer countries that lack some of the physical things that we so often think are absolutely necessary for happiness in first world countries, suicide rates are lower, religiosity rates are higher. Obviously they lack some things that we're very thankful for. But I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that why would religiosity be higher where suffering is higher? Whereas in many ways, I mean, I think there's alternative forms of suffering that we in the first world encounter that drive us to a nihilism. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that dynamic, if any of that was part of going from Rand and Vonnegut and a sort of atheistic conservatism, quote unquote, to atheism and then Christianity.
Yeah, even when I was Randian or a libertarian, I still had a profound concern for human suffering. In fact, that's what attracted me to Ayn Rand. Even though she was quote unquote pro-choice, I thought she just didn't understand human development. She died in like 1979. But, I had already by this time been a student of genocide and democide. I was obsessed with this is what I wanted to order my life to do, end abortion and prevent the genocides and democides of the future. I actually wrote a book on this, The Race to Save Our Century.
Great book.
And I often think about what I call the problem of a beautiful life compared to the problem of pain. I remember my first prayer, and I'm working on my spiritual autobiography now for Sophia Press. And my mother had me at 16. We lived right next door to my grandmother. When my mom would work, I would stay with my grandmother, and it was like a blessed time. And I remember one day I was playing with my little army men, and she had a big glass door, and it was this green shag carpeting, and I had my little green and gray soldiers. And my grandma would make me in a Sunday dish, like scrambled eggs with toast chopped up, and it was like my favorite. She would do her crossword puzzles and drink her coffee. So it was heaven, and I was watching Sesame Street. Well, Sesame Street went to electric company, and electric company went to something else, and I'm still playing in heaven. And then it went to adult programming, and it was on heroin addiction in Chicago. All I remember, I was probably 3, is just seeing people with spoons and lighters and needles and skinny and burned out buildings. And I just sat there horrified, and I had prayed, God, I know you only have so many good lives to give out, so many bad lives. Give me one of those lives so no one else has to have it. Like, that was my first prayer. The idea that someone would have to do that had so upset and I'm like, I felt I was so lucky. I won't get into the details of my childhood, but I don't think many people would have said it was I was blessed up to this point. But I felt that I was just living the most charmed existence. And it was so sad that someone would have to go through that. And then I look at kind of my whole life. I dropped out of high school at 17, joined the Army, ended up having 2 kids by 19. I'm alone in Hawaii. Now with a new family, kind of, not much connection with my parents. And I always felt alone, but never lonely. But my aloneness, and I never felt sorry for myself. In fact, I always was kind of charmed. My friends say the sun always shines on Jason Jones. And if I could paint my life in a way that looks very tragic, but it's not. And even to this day, I have a lot of siblings, and life has been very hard on them. So I think maybe it's this overarching struggle of the problem of a lack of pain.
Yeah.
Like, how could there be an all-knowing, and I think about this, how could there be an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful, all-good God, and a jerk like me has such a charmed life, and so many wonderful people suffer relentlessly? That might be that. I wonder how many people in the back of their mind think that their easy, charmed life disproves God. I always say I'm a loser. If I can, the first line of if I may use a naughty word, the first line of my spiritual autobiography is, I'm a piece of shit.
Yeah.
I kind of think that. I always say I'm a loser with high self-esteem. No failure will undermine my self-esteem, and no success will make me stop feeling like a loser, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But I do think that, it's perplexing, right? we can look at how easy we have it. We can go our whole life, as Jim Gaffigan says, and never have been hungry for 1 minute.
Yeah.
Never really scared. And I have a friend today, I'll tell you, this week, we had a great success as delivering aid into Gaza. Thousands of containers of baby formula, hot meals to every Christian in Gaza, and thousands of meals to orphans. As part of our work, I roped off a neighborhood where my friend, a Palestinian gentleman from Allentown, Pennsylvania's family lives. I said, let's deliver 2 hot meals a day for the next 5 days, not only to his family, but the entire neighborhood. And it was a camp. And we did that. And I went to bed just so happy. And first thing I did this morning is I turned on my phone to see pictures of my friend's family receiving food. And I found out that they died overnight when Israel struck the camp. The mom, the dad, the kids, they're dead, all of them. And then one of my friends said, well, Jason, at least you can know you gave them a very big, beautiful, happy last meal, as strange as that sounds. That doesn't give me any comfort. It makes it even more uncanny. So I can sit here and say, how does this beautiful man with his beautiful family, his beautiful relatives suffer? And, us together in Ukraine, we saw horrible things, mass graves and whole cities razed. And, again, by God's grace, the hard work of our ancestors and their sacrifices, hopefully our children or grandchildren won't ever go through this, but I do think it may lead to some kind of like mirror, scandal that kind of mirrors the problem of pain. It is the problem of pain. It's just the problem of someone else's pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's so much to get into that. So one of the things we definitely are going to cover is, because you and I have we talk about this a lot, so much agreement, the sort of brutalization of many modern Christians with respect to the struggles and sufferings of our co-religionists across the world, obviously, particularly in Gaza, but there are many, many places. Less people want to paint you as some anti-Semite, which of course is kind of a dime a dozen enterprise these days, which is tragic because there is real anti-Semitism, and when it's thrown around so casually, it cheapens the actual evil of Jew hatred. But you do stuff for Christians. I mean, but we'll get into that more. But like, you don't even limit it to Christians. You do it for anybody, right? The most vulnerable people. And I want to get into your philosophy about this. But Muslims, atheists, Christians, Yazidis, whoever they may be. But just to kind of prepare the ground for that. So you become Christian. Oh, I had one quick question. Was your chief opposition to Christianity, do you think it was because of that wealthy Catholic father who forced your girlfriend to get an abortion? Do you think that was the core of it, or do you think it was something else?
That was definitely the core.
Okay.
But like my experiences on college campus, I went to the Newman Center.
Yeah.
And, I would face opposition from the priest at the Newman Center. I would, at the state capitol, I remember I was working for a state representative. The head of the representative of the bishop at the legislature didn't care about abortion, didn't care about traditional marriage. It was very scandalous to me. And in fact, when I told him I was converting to Catholicism, he like gasped and said, God, no.
Oh, man, that's hilarious. I didn't know that. That's awesome. Yeah. But the scandal of cowardice, which is, and you're on our advisory board, and you're on our advisory board for many reasons, not only because you're a trusted friend, not only because you're very intelligent, not only because you have wonderful relationships and whatnot, but you are courageous. And you and I don't always 100% agree on everything, but we agree on 99.9.
We can tell people we argue a lot.
Yeah, but it's over niceties. On the big things, on the things that you talk about, we're pretty much in
we argue over prudential disagreements.
Yeah, but even then, it's becoming less and less as I mature. I'm disagreeing I'm disagreeing with you less and less. No, my point being that I forget what my point was at that particular
I was on your board.
juncture.
You said you had me on your board for many reasons.
Oh, that's right. The advisory board is you're courageous, and we need more courage in this world. And I'm trying to find ways. I've always been a pretty direct guy, but there are topics that I'm trying to find a way to be more courageous and direct about that I think we need to prophetically speak into as Catholics. But so that we can get into some of the modern issues with political activism, Gaza, whatever, let's just quickly go through. So you become Christian in some way. Was there a moment at which you were baptized, you considered yourself a Baptist or some sect of Protestantism? And ultimately, why did you not find Protestantism convincing? What's the short version of this story?
Well, there were too many disagreements and too many ecclesial communities. And I was really open. At this time, I was passionate. And I was going to Calvary Chapel. I'd read the New Testament. I'd read the entire New Testament several times. I went to my pastor, who I adored, asked him what I should read next. And it was like Chuck Smith tapes or Oswald Spengler, things like this. I'd started reading everything. I bought the complete works of Francis Schaeffer, and I was so excited about that. But in many ways, I see a lot of Francis Schaeffer's writings seem strikingly derivative of Catholic encyclicals.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just great minds think alike, or I don't know, but
and can we give Francis Schaeffer a bit of credit? Really, I meant to do this earlier.
Oh, yeah, I adore
Francis Schaeffer, an evangelical thinker, I think he was Presbyterian, like you said. He wrote a great book, How Now Shall We Live, I think. How Then Now Shall We Live, or one of those phrasings. And he was very helpful for me in forming a coherent Christian worldview. But like you, I was realizing that we could assert that Christianity was true in an absolute sense, but as a Protestant, I kept running up against, we'd assert moral absolutes and religious absolute to the atheist, but among ourselves, we would be relativists, essentially. It's just opinions about Jesus, and all are equally valid. And that just struck me as totally incoherent and absurd. Sounds like that was your thought process.
Completely. As well. Completely. Especially the more I would ask questions of my pastors.
Like what?
Well, I asked them, I said, I want to read everything every Christian has ever written.
Good luck.
I was naive. Only Josh Charles has done that.
No, I got a long way.
I really asked, what came after, the canon was closed? What came next? I want to read that. And it was kind of the Catholics didn't allow a lot. There wasn't too much. Okay. And I don't even know how, but I found Francis Schaeffer's book, As an Atheist, Christian Manifesto, at a yard sale. And I was writing a book called Generation X Manifesto. And so that was going to be my libertarian atheist anthem.
Screed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was going to launch me into wealth and fame when I graduated college. But I bought it just because it had the word manifesto in it. I kid you not. And that book really was wonderful. And but you're right. I found Chesterton and Belloc the same way. I just tripped across them. No one had handed me Chesterton. No one had handed me Belloc. No one had handed me Fulton Sheen. I found Fulton Sheen, his Piece of Soul at Barnes and Noble. Can you believe that? It was just there. And I bought it for a friend who was going through something just because the cover was something I thought this woman would need. I don't know. And I read it myself, and it rocked my world. So it was just really grace. It's just really blessed. And then I just found the Church Fathers, and I read the Jurgens. And then once, you start reading the Church Fathers, it's inescapable. And it's inescapable. This is what's inescapable. If you're an evangelical Christian and you're reading this right now, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You're going to read the Church Fathers, and you're going to go, oh no, I have to become Greek Orthodox because I'm not becoming Catholic. That's what I did.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, I have to become Orthodox because Catholicism is not an option. So I really was so committed to the Orthodox. So I started studying the schism though. And so much so that my sister and one of my best friends both became Orthodox the same year I became Catholic, but they were following along with me. And at the last minute, I just...
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I really wanted to be Orthodox because of the beauty of the liturgy. And also I wanted to go to an ecclesial community that wasn't at civil war with itself. When I converted to Catholicism, I told my friends I'm moving to Rwanda. I knew very well I was... even now, I have a strange hobby. Is I buy Catholic newspapers and magazines from the 19th and 20th century,
Oh, interesting.
And I love reading them. Like
okay.
in the teens and 20s and 30s, because I want to be a Catholic in a world where we're just Catholic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's why even last night I was buying Columbia magazines from 1925.
Yeah. Wow. So did you become Orthodox first?
No.
You
but
didn't.
I studied the schism for like 2 years.
Okay.
And when I realized there were multiple schisms, and each time the church came back, even the last time, a large percentage of the church returned, right? I believe
talking about Florence, the reunion council. Okay. Yeah.
So that was it for me. And it wasn't, again, I'm ashamed to say this. Like C.S. Lewis said, he was the most reluctant convert. I did not want to ascend to the truth of Christianity for simple reasons. I definitely didn't want to place myself under the authority of a hierarchy in which I did not trust. Oh, I'll tell you a funny story. So I read the book Windswept House because I heard Art Bell. This is for, the older audience, guys, folks listening. And I read Windswept House by Malachi Martin. And I had marked every part of this book with, like, I underlined it and had tabs. And in Hawaii, we have a Chaminade University, and I knew that there were priests. I thought they were priests that lived above it, but they weren't priests. They were retired brothers. Okay, I didn't know. But I walked up one day and banged on the doors, like on a Saturday morning. I wanted to find a priest to go over everything Malachi Martin says about, like, Satanism and Masonry infiltrating the church.
Yeah.
So I banged on the door, and I'm not kidding you. This little brother who couldn't be 5 feet tall, who entered religious life in 1932, he said to me. Now, this was like 95, 97, maybe, 98. So I banged on his door, and I asked him if he had heard of this book. First of all, he's like, what are you doing here? I wasn't supposed to be there. And I said, well, hey, I read this book, and I want to know if it's true. This priest says that the Freemasons and Satanists have infiltrated the Catholic Church. Okay, here, I'm not even Catholic. I'm like, is that true? He goes, yeah, of course it's true. I said, well, why are you Catholic then? He said, are you dumb? He's like staring up at me, this old guy. He's like, let me ask you 2 questions. He goes, was Lucifer in the Garden of Eden? Was Satan in the Garden of Eden before the fall? I said, yeah. Would you have left the Garden of Eden because Satan was there? The serpent was there? I said, no. He said, was Judas following Jesus everywhere? Yeah. Would you have left the side of Jesus because Judas was there? No. Then why do you want me to leave my church because of a few idiot Masons and Satanists? And he slams the door on my face.
Wow.
3 years later, I was unpolitically incorrect, and Bill Maher attacks the church. I use those same 2 lines. I get 1,000 emails, people telling me I'm a genius and quick on my feet. I was just plagiarizing an old brother.
Wow.
But I really grappled with scandal. I grappled with division in the church. I was already fighting abortion, and I can tell you what, in the 90s, that was a big enough fight on its own. I'd go to Calvary Chapel. They had a coffee shop, a bookstore. We were all on the same page on everything, and when politics, da-da-da. It was very comforting. And then when I told the head of the Catholic conference in Hawaii that I was becoming Catholic, he gasped and said, oh, no. So I understood what it meant. And I had not received the Eucharist yet, so I did not understand the beauty and grace of the sacraments. So I'm embarrassed that I really dragged my feet for 2 years after I assented to the truth of the Catholic Church before I began the process to come into the church.
And what year was that you came in?
2003, August 6th, 2003.
August 6th. Wow. So we just passed your anniversary the recording date of this podcast. Wow. Yeah. Wow. So what, 22 years then? Wow. That's amazing. I just passed my 6th anniversary. So I've got a few more years to catch up on you. How old were you at the time?
31, 32.
Okay. I was 31 myself when I came into the church. So we have a similar age there as well. That's I'm glad that you mentioned all this about scandal. There's so much to be said about that. Of course, I'd get into a whole other interview, but I think there's sometimes this caricature among Protestants that some Catholics convert, particularly more intellectual converts, because they think being Catholic will solve all their problems, cross all the T's, dot all the I's. And I think there are some people who probably do that. But for me, it was, and it sounds like for you, it was the exact opposite. I saw so much scandal in the history of the church, and yet the church was still here. I saw so many attempts to get it off course doctrinally, and yet its doctrine, when I read the fathers, almost every day, all these guys behind me, we can read virtually everything they wrote today in the church. Now, have certain theologies been refined and we express it somewhat differently? Absolutely. But in essence, it's all there. It's all there. And so there was this continuity despite all this buffeting of the ship with waves and storms. And I just didn't see anything like that in Protestantism. It was, the ship was constantly splitting into smaller ships, and there was no stability, no continuity, and certainly not that was really brought to the forefront when I read our ancient Christian ancestors. So
I want to also say, Josh, I was not only worried about scandal, I was worried that I would become a scandal. Because I was young, but I was, in a way, I was already like on Fox News and CNN and Politically Incorrect in the 700.
Sure.
So I would do all these shows. And, I was one of the young pro-life leaders in America. When I was an atheist, my sort of the way I lived my life, in a way, helped my pro-life work. Oh, that crazy atheist guy. See, even he's pro-life. But I knew that I would go from being crazy atheist, young pro-life guy from Hawaii to Catholic pro-lifer overnight. And I wouldn't, and I was just afraid I would be a scandal. I would create scandal, if that makes any sense. In fact, for the first year, I would go to daily mass with my Magnificat and not even tell anyone I wanted to become Catholic. I was working for Human Life International at the time, didn't even tell them. In fact, there were a lot of layoffs, and people, whenever there were layoffs, people's piety really went through the roof. And I did not want anyone to think that my coming to the church was me trying to keep my job. And also, I just still wasn't, I didn't want to be a scandal. And so I would go to mass in Virginia or DC by myself every day with my Magnificat. And I didn't tell anyone that I was thinking of becoming Catholic. When I let HLI know I wanted to resign, and I told them I'm resigning because I'm becoming Catholic, which they thought that was strange. They're a Catholic apostolate, and I was their media person who was, at the time, they would have thought I was atheist or agnostic, or I'd stopped going to evangelical church maybe in 2000. I went for a year, and then I realized this isn't it. And I was studying, and living in my own world, started going to mass by myself. But when I told him I was resigning, and I did resign, and moved back to Hawaii, and that's when I began the journey to enter the church. But I didn't want to be a scandal. And the funny thing is, I was a Catholic for about a half hour before I was a scandal. I'm not kidding you. I went to, I was baptized and confirmed, and my buddy got us backstage passes to the Beach Boys, and I was praying the rosary, listening to Mother Angelica, like holy and perfect, no sin. And I get cut off in traffic as I'm going to see the Beach Boys after my baptism and confirmation. And the hand comes up with the rosary in it. The hand comes up with the rosary in it. I was like, I'm
maybe another
for less than a day, and I'm already creating a scandal.
Another appendage of the hand as well.
That's a true story. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my first sin as a Christian. I know exactly what it was.
Yeah. That's funny.
With the rosary in my hand and Mother Angelica in the speakers.
Well, aren't we all these little paradoxes? Before we move on to Girard and again, some of the more political stuff and your philosophy of solidarity with the vulnerable, which I think is really important for people to understand. I want to give some credit to our Protestant background. I was in it a lot longer than you, obviously, but I bear in mind guys like Francis Schaeffer, but many others as well. As a Protestant, I learned two basic truths that were extremely important, have been extremely important in my life, but also led me to the Catholic Church. That the Bible is God's word, inerrant, inspired, all that. There's no toying with that. And number two, that truth is real. It is binding on all. It is the same for all. Now, I was seeing both of those realities simply incapable of manifesting properly or in a coherent way within Protestantism. And then when exposed to the, I would say, ubiquitous and on many issues, basically unanimous witness of our Christian ancestors, that the faith established by Christ is the Catholic faith, that the church established by Christ is the Catholic Church, and all the immense evidence for that, then I realized that these two great truths I learned as a Protestant actually had a home. And it wasn't in Protestantism. It was in the Catholic Church. And it sounds like you had roughly speaking, a pretty similar approach. So Jason, I want to know about where René Girard comes into all this. So just so people know, I won't say who the friends are, but you and I have a ongoing, multi-year thread with some of our political friends. Everybody's Catholic or near Catholic. We won't say who, although this person will know who we're talking about them. But it's gone by various names over the years, but sometimes it's called Girardians or Girard Resurrected or whatever. So, and it
has a more ominous name, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And End of the Ages is the name now. End of the Ages. So we're leaving open the possibility that we're not an Antichrist, but we're at the end of something that's certainly apocalyptic, it seems. But yeah, no. So, but I think it's an homage to you and your articulation of how Girard helped lead you to the fullness of your worldview, and also how you live it out. So, yeah, explain it however you want, because I do want to get into this, not just Gaza, but anything, because I think this is where, when it comes to the great tradition, which, in the Eternal Christian logo has the Greek element, the Jewish element, the Roman element, all brought together by the cross. You are a reader. You have dived into this great tradition, and it has led you to very firm and I think countercultural and also a prophetic mode of life that more people need to, even if they don't agree with everything you say, and I agree with basically everything you say, but even if they don't, I think they need to think about your example and how you got to that way of behavior. So I'll leave it up to you, however you want to approach this.
Yeah, well, I was blessed. I discovered Girard maybe in the early 2000s. I would hang out at the Catholic Information Center on K Street in Washington,
So
D.C.
after your conversion?
In the midst of and after. Yeah.
Okay.
Even before my conversion, I was always there at the Catholic Information Center. They have great books.
Sure.
And at the time, they had this Catholic Lifetime Reading Plan. And I bought Father Hardin's Catholic Lifetime Reading Plan, which you should all get on eBay. You have to get it used. But
yeah.
And I would go through all these books. And Pope Benedict, I had read that it was his favorite book. If you see I See Satan Fall Like Lightning by René Girard. Now, if you see the cover of this book, it looks like it was printed in some guy's basement and they're selling it at like a gun show or something, like some sort of apocalyptic. It's the worst cover of all time, and I cannot wait till they redesign the cover. So I bought the book very early on, maybe 2002 or 3, but I did not read it until maybe 9 years after I bought it. And I had just submitted my first book with John Zmirak, The Race to Save Our Century, to publishers. And I'm so grateful because it didn't change how I see the world. But the way I say is reading Girard would have delayed my next book because I would have wanted to incorporate the insights that I got from Girard. And I almost read Girard as pastoral theology. I'll tell you the big takeaway that I got from when I read his first book, which is really, really, it's maybe why I'm a loser with high self-esteem. Girard gives me my self-esteem back because, again, this is going to sound weird. I saw a French film in college called Ridicule. And anyone who comes to work for me has to watch Ridicule. It was about a young French nobleman, poor nobleman, whose peasants were dying of malaria, who goes to Versailles with his plans to drain the swamps and rid his community of malaria and save his peasants. He goes there and it's just decadent and no one cares about his plans. And he goes home heartbroken and he discovers his favorite peasant boy is dead. And he goes back to Versailles, and instead of boring people with his plans, he just becomes friends with people. He becomes, the funny guy, the party guy. He does whatever he has to do at Versailles to get the queen to give him his money for his swamps, to drain his swamps. So that was I read that and I go, I bore everyone with my plans, but I'm the life of the party.
What's the name of that movie again? So everybody,
Ridicule.
I've not seen it before.
Ridicule. It's sad. It's not
Ridicule.
Download it anywhere. You either have to get it for free and, however you do that, or
okay,
as I do, I'm always buying DVDs and giving them to people, but you can probably get it at your local library too. It's a great film.
Ridicule. Okay. Ridicule, French film.
Great
All
film.
right.
And so that sort of was my plan. I'm just going to move to Washington after college, and I'm going to, you know, get as close to power as I can and leverage power for the vulnerable. And whenever I would be near success, it would be as things would fall apart. And then reading, or I would lose relationships I spent years building.
What's an example of that? It's interesting for how. What do you mean by that? Whenever I get near to success, it falls apart.
Okay, so we can just take Gaza for example. Well, I want to. So but what René Girard said is when you become in solidarity with the vulnerable, you become as vulnerable as the scapegoat. So when Jesus kneels down next to a woman caught in the act of adultery, he is becoming vulnerable. When you kiss a leper, like St. Damien, you tend lepers, you get leprosy. He says through solidarity, you become indistinguishable with the vulnerable that you serve, as the second person of the Trinity became indistinguishable from us. And then we will suffer. And he said, that's what Christianity is. All religions are scapegoating religions. You say the other is responsible for all the disorder in the community, and you kill the other, and order is restored. But Girard says Christianity is the opposite. It's in solidarity with the scapegoat that one restores order. He says, and it gets to be more complex when we get to like the end of the age and the unraveling of the scapegoat mechanism. And when solidarity doesn't hold, then all things fall apart. It's a war of all against all. The scapegoat mechanism does create order, for sure. But what Christianity does is give one the understanding of they're in solidarity with the vulnerable. When you're in solidarity with the vulnerable, you too will become vulnerable. And I always used to think, like, one of my plans when I wrote my 40-year plan is I'm going to get rich and famous people to come out pro-life. And I made Hollywood movies like Bella that won Toronto, launching Eduardo Verástegui, who's become an outspoken celebrity for life. I made a movie with Benjamin Watson, the tight end for the New England Patriots, a great documentary for Fox Nation that we made called Divided Hearts of America with Justin Bieber's mother. We made Crescendo. So I have done all of this, but you would think, like, in doing all of this, like when Patty Millett, Justin Bieber's mom, came to work with us on Crescendo, she was startled at how devastating it was to her and how many attacks that she had to weather and suffer. She thought that my fame, my son's celebrity, would inoculate her from this. And I would say now, even with Gaza, when you stand in solidarity with the scapegoat, with the pariah, those who have been shoved outside of social concern, which is why I founded my organization, to advocate for human beings shoved outside of social concern, like the child in the womb. When you do that, you too become a leper. When I ask friends that, whether in the cabinet or in the Senate or wherever they are, to speak out or to leverage their influence or their position to end the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, I can tell you, I have friends right now that are afraid of me because of how outspoken I have people who are in positions of power. I chose not to go to the inauguration this year, which I could have gone to.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be in the West Bank. I actually wanted to be in Gaza. They wouldn't let me in. So I went to Bethlehem and was with the very Christian community that now is in the news because they're being brutalized. Yeah. So when you stand in solidarity, it's funny, so many quote unquote pro-lifers today. I had a pro-life friend call me the other day and he asked me, he said, Jason, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't speak out for the Palestinian Christians and what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank and the Palestinians generally. He said, but can't you do it in a different way? And I just started cracking up. I said, that's what I heard in 1989 and 1990 about my pro-life work, in 1994, 1995, and 1999. Well, now to be pro-life is acceptable. In fact, maybe even dominant, especially in the GOP. But I can tell you, when I was chairman of the college Republicans and chairman of the young Republicans, I was always being told by people in the party with power and influence to moderate my views, moderate my rhetoric, to not be so aggressive. And so what Girard helped me understand is that to be in solidarity with the vulnerable is to become vulnerable. That's just the reality of it.
And what's the imperative of that? What's the imperative of that? Like this really has, like you've described to me in private conversations, you've described it publicly too, but just why you feel that it's so important for us as Catholics to identify with the vulnerable. Like what's the impetus behind that?
In a way, something that Francis Schaeffer would talk about is pre-evangelization. I'm not Scott Hahn. I'm not a saintly guy. Like, no one's going to meet Jason Jones and go, wow, what a holy person. But what I can do is deliver food into Gaza, evacuate nuns from Sudan, or, this is what I can do. And I know what it's like to be powerless to protect one's own child from violence. And the idea that anyone can feel like that addles me, like drives me crazy, actually. And to know that I can do something about it, it's just this week I got an Instagram message. My cousin's starving in Gaza City. She's due any day now. She's pregnant. She has no food. She has no baby formula. And within 72 hours, the VPP team not only came, we went to her neighborhood and we were able to deliver her several months of food and baby formula and feed her entire block. And to know that some man who felt helpless for his cousin who was dying and the child in her womb was dying, that now they were not helpless. And the one thing I've discovered is the people we serve, they're not weak, they're vulnerable. And vulnerable people are strong people placed in impossible situations. If you throw an Olympic swimmer in the ocean, he's going to drown. If I come by in my boat, that doesn't mean I'm stronger than they are. That means I have a boat.
Yeah.
And VPP is a boat. I'm just a guy with a boat, not a big boat, but I got a boat. And, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm so grateful that, right now, today, my volunteers and staff are feeding the most hungry, starving children in the world. We're feeding orphans, 18,000 kids in Gaza that have no living relative.
Wow. And that's a sobering statistic.
If there was an article that came out from a Catholic gentleman that I greatly admire, but it was called We're Winning. It was about, he went to some great big ball and they had like prime rib and there were these great speakers. And I don't think we're winning, in Congo, in Nigeria, in India, the Hindutva, there's brutal attacks on the church in India, in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Syria. In China, we have like 15 bishops that have been disappeared. Bishops. We have Jimmy Lai molting in a prison. We're not winning. The body of Christ is suffering. And we are the most privileged Christians who've ever walked the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And what an opportunity we have to live a life of solidarity. And I think they have the harder part, which is to suffer and be gracious.
Yeah.
We have the easy part, but to suffer and then the challenge of gratitude. That's graciousness is hard when one is embittered and suffering.
Yeah.
But the communities we serve are always very gracious. Being gracious when people help me is something I've always struggled with. And I so greatly admire these communities that struggle, that fight, and then can be gracious in the moments of these moments of indignity.
So let's give some of the audience some ideas of some of the projects you guys have done really since Iraq, because you were one of the early and most vocal opponents of the war in Iraq, the Bush administration's, voluntary war. I was in high school at the time, and as a patriotic, post 9/11 American, believing we should just trust our president, and believing a lot of the propaganda about Saddam Hussein, who was not a good man by any stretch, but certainly a lot of what was said about him and his ambitions with weapons of mass destruction ended up not being true. Just tell people about some of the projects that you've done, and also just anecdotes you think illustrate the how would I put it, the importance of what you're talking about, of solidarity with the vulnerable, contrasted with the way of thinking and mode of behavior in the halls of power that you've encountered. I think some anecdotes would be extremely helpful to illustrate this to people.
Sure. And before I even do that, I'm going to say something else that Girard helped inoculate me from is, he said, in the post-gospel era, we now can't scapegoat victims, but we can exploit them. We call it victimism. And victimism is one feigns concern for the vulnerable for wealth, power, or prestige. And so sometimes if my friends see me almost trying to commit career suicide, it's because I'm trying to prove to myself I'm not a victimist.
Yeah.
Like I have to suffer a cost.
When you and I have talked about this, the first victimist was, at least in the New Testament,
Judas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why? Tell people why.
Well, he pretended to care about our Lord, right? He profited off of our Lord. And of course, he didn't have, I don't know if you want to go into it more, but.
Sure. Yeah. Well, he pretended to care about the poor, right?
Yeah,
he said, this money spent on this ointment could have been, that was to clean our Lord's feet and whatnot, could have been spent on the poor.
Yeah, imagine if I talked about the persecuted Christians in Nigeria, in India, in everywhere in the world, but I refused to speak up for what's happening in Gaza or the West Bank simply because I did not want to suffer the consequences that you can suffer from standing up to this very powerful interest group and knowing a lot of our friends have very powerful emotional commitment to Zionism. If I were to just put that on the shelf, I'd be a victimist. It means that when there's a real cost, I'm not willing to do it. And so Girard has helped inoculate me. I don't even wrestle. I used to wrestle, like, where's the prudential? What can I say? What can I do? Now I'm just like, hit the gas, step on the gas. But I can give you, so you want me to give you examples of like what the work VPP has done? I founded it in 2002 in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, trying to mobilize the pro-life movement to oppose the invasion in support of St. John Paul the Great's. He said that this would break the secular equilibrium and it would be catastrophic to the religious minorities there. And in fact, it was. It's
exactly what's happened. Yeah.
Exactly what's happened. It's happened in Syria, happened in, so that's why I opposed it. And then from there, I founded Movie to Movement. We started making movies and serving the church in Sudan and other places. But when we really kind of ramped up was when the first, where the VPP kind of launched. Well, we were founded in 2002, but it was when the first IS attack, the Islamic State attack on a church in Baghdad, which was October 31st, 2010, I believe. And I organized Chaldean and Assyrian leaders in Chicago and Michigan. And we tried to mobilize because I realized this is it. It's about to happen. And it was like a slow motion nightmare. Everything
It being what?
Pardon me?
It being what? When you say it's about to happen?
The cleansing of first century Christian communities of Iraq, the Yazidi tragedy, just this, if you want to talk about kind of the beauty of the gospel, just this August 3rd, I was in Taiwan. I flew from Taiwan to Lincoln, Nebraska to be with a young woman. She's my sister to me and I'm a brother to her. Her name is Shirin. She lost most of her family in her village and she had been, imprisoned and abused by ISIS. And now she lives in Lincoln. But the Yazidi were Christians and Jews and Muslims wouldn't eat in Iraq anything like they wouldn't eat from a Yazidi restaurant, or if they found out a bushel of apples came from the Yazidi, they would throw them away. But when I was in Iraq, I would always offer my Yazidi friends food off my plate and I would eat off their plate. Just kind of, that was my way of trying to teach Paul.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they would say that I shouldn't eat food they touched. But I was just with my friend Shirin, my sister, and we were in Nebraska and I took her to Olive Garden and she got her whatever shrimp scampi. I got shrimp scampi. She got chicken marsala. I don't know. But I'll never forget, like, it was just one of the most beautiful moments of my life. She goes, "Brother, here." And she hands me from her plate food. And like, to me, that's just something that's kind of beautiful. I think it's kind of the work of VPP. Another instance when we were evacuating Afghans, Christians in Hazara, and then those men who served along the U.S. forces that were granted visas, and we were evacuating them. We got a LinkedIn message.
This is after the withdrawal, just so people have a sense of timeline.
After the withdrawal.
Yeah.
I got an email from a very bashful man, an Afghan man, who had worked for an international NGO promoting abortion in Afghanistan.
Wow.
And he said he was embarrassed and shy, sheepish, and he said we wouldn't help him. He knows, but just in case we would, he's desperate to get out of Afghanistan. And I wrote him. I said, well, I said to him, who's the fetus now? I said, but you're lucky.
Wow.
I rescue fetuses, and we evacuated him.
Wow. That's an amazing line. Who's the fetus now? Wow. That's perfect.
But,
wow.
But you're lucky because I rescue fetuses.
How did he respond?
Well, he wrote me a really nice letter that he, and through LinkedIn, that he would never do this again. And he was so grateful for us.
Wow.
And, like VPP right now, we advocate for the Yazidis, for the Uyghur. We have armed guards outside of a synagogue, outside of churches, outside of girls' schools in Muslim countries. I want to stand with the most vulnerable people in the world, and I want to rescue the most vulnerable people in the world. I recognize that large NGOs with lots of stakeholders and they cannot do some of the more daring things that we can do as a smaller organization. I used to kind of be sanctimonious and begrudge them for not doing it. But now I understand that, no, they can't. There's just too much at risk. If they're distributing, tens of thousands of tons of food around the world, why risk jeopardizing the whole operation to deliver 2,000 meals to this community here? That's our job.
Because of violence, it'd be jeopardized because it's going into a war zone and it might get all taken, or
because of violence, or because of legal ambiguities, or because of you don't want to alienate a large nation state. So, for example, if Khartoum in Sudan, when Bashir said no aid should come in from the West to Sudan, that's when we brought in $3 million in food and medicine.
Yeah.
The large NGOs had to listen to what this government said. We didn't.
Got it.
When we were evacuating Afghans very early on, we had to do some daring things, things that a compliance lawyer may or may not have approved.
Yeah.
And so I understand large NGOs have to be more careful. At VPP, our mission is to stand with the most vulnerable people in the world, where there's a social cost, physical cost. And really my goal is to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with people. We never, everyone knows we're a Catholic apostolate. Everyone we serve knows we're a Catholic apostolate, but we never evangelize. I don't think it's appropriate to be whisking someone out of a country where he's being hunted into a safe house and preaching to him along the way.
Yeah.
How we share the gospel is through love, through fortitude. We still have safe houses for our Afghan partners.
Yeah.
I don't have many other NGOs that still do that. And so I think it's through our long suffering, through our fortitude.
People need to support what you're doing because, and what's the website again?
vulnerablepeopleproject.com.
Yeah. I'm a monthly patron. I've given before, but I recently decided to become a monthly patron because, I've known you for years and I'm ashamed I didn't start it sooner. But, you guys have done work in Sudan, Afghanistan, Gaza, West Bank, Israel, Iraq, Syria, Nigeria. There are a lot of things that Jason can't even talk about, just so people know. And that sometimes as a trusted friend, I sometimes get to hear about behind the scenes. But you guys are doing amazing things and getting into places where nobody else is getting. And so I'm going to ask people, please give to you guys. I want to know from your perspective with the Iraq war and going into the latest conflict in Gaza, what's wrong with American Christian conservatives? I know it's a kind of incendiary question, but because I've had many issues with it as well. And, we're thankful for many of these people. We are. And I'll speak for myself. I have been among this group of people sometimes that I would now be critical of in light of becoming Catholic, in light of, some experiences I've had. Like you, I've been to the Middle East numerous times. I have Palestinian friends, I have Jewish friends, I have Arab friends. I have Jewish settler friends in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. and I have friends who are born in Dheisheh refugee camp. One of the Palestinian Arab refugee camps that was set up after 48. So I have a very unique set of experiences that maybe we can trade some stories a little bit, but I'm primarily interested in just your thoughts and anecdotes about like what is wrong. How has the American conservative Christian mind been twisted? What's the state of it today, and what's the solution?
Yeah, it's been heartbreaking for me, Josh. There's never been, first of all, the hardest part about my work in Gaza and the West Bank has been I have settler friends too. I mean, I have Christian friends in Bethlehem and settler friends in Bethlehem. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And I'll text them. I was texting with one day. Well, my Christian friend called and I was like, oh no, she must know I'm texting a settler. She's finding out and she's mad at me. And I hate, this is just selfishness, I guess, or narcissism or whatever. I don't like not being liked. Or worse, I don't like my friends thinking I hate them. Right? Or I don't want my friends feeling betrayed by me. VPP rescued someone for the Jewish Fund from Afghanistan. We also, our most daring rescue was for another very large Jewish NGO. We have longstanding partnerships and commitments. And when October 7th happened, God forgive me, I never said it out loud, but in my own head, the literal words that went through my head as I saw this catastrophe was flatten Gaza. It went through my mind. My mind. I write these beautiful flowery words,
Yep.
Say all these sweet things. And then through my mind, went the words flatten Gaza. And then I was like, what's wrong with you? The mailman's coming, so my dog's about to go nuts. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Then like 2 weeks later, Israel drops a bomb on the oldest continuous church use in the Middle East. And, but at that time and I hate saying this because, some of my best friends are black, that whole line, on October 7th, the first thing I did was approve money I didn't have to put security guards around a vulnerable synagogue somewhere in Africa. Okay.
Yeah.
We knew was vulnerable. We didn't have a budget for it, but that's what I did that day. And then we drilled them a well and put in solar just so the women wouldn't have to walk to get water. And I want to use that as a shield from criticism for what I do for Gaza. But, that was my knee-jerk response at first. And then, we began always doing what we do. We respond to requests for help. So right away, we were asked to help to get food into the churches, and we did. And then we were asked to do something which at the time I was naive. I didn't realize was controversial, was to evacuate pregnant women or women that were wounded and children were wounded. Well, I didn't really understand at the time that when a Palestinian leaves Gaza, they're never allowed back. So people were upset with me for evacuating these. Well, they were asked to be evacuated. But then I went with a friend of ours, Halil Sayegh, to Egypt to interview these Palestinians that we had evacuated. And it was in the interviewing of these Palestinians that my own deeply held prejudices were revealed to myself. I was taken aback at how humane they were, how kind, how not one of them was addled with a hatred or prejudice towards Jews. They were even expressing concern that the behavior of the IDF would lead to a global rise in anti-Semitism, and it wasn't affected. One woman who suffered horribly, and then the soldiers had smashed her statues of Jesus and Mary and put on her underwear and pranced around on social media with it, you can see. When I asked her, how this made her feel, she said, I really feel sorry for these boys. They were poorly trained reservists who were thrust into war, and that's a horrible thing. And it was absolutely sincere. Yeah. And then I just heard my internal dialogue, and I realized I would not have been shocked to hear a German speak this way, or an Italian, or an Israeli, but I was shocked that Palestinians would talk this way. And I realized, and then I wrote an article called "Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot." And so I remind myself of that. And I wrote in detail sort of, these deeply held prejudices that I had going back to being a boy in Chicago when Palestinians moved into our neighborhood. We weren't happy about that.
And just to be clear, I'm laughing and smiling not because I think that's unserious, because I think it's deeply serious and it's so emblematic of who you are. The number of times you've called me up the last 13 years and be like, hey, I've got this article idea. And it's just this crazy, incendiary, but totally true title. That is just, it's just great. And it's, anyway, I love that.
Well, I thought
forgot
my
that you'd written
friends
that.
would be hurt by it, you know?
Yeah.
And they weren't. They were really greatly. And I was at an event at the State Department, and one Palestinian woman like looked at me. She goes, "You're Jason Jones? You wrote the anti-Palestinian, I'm a Palestinian bigot article?" And I was like, "Oh no." She was clearly Palestinian. I was like, "I did write that." And she started crying and she hugged me.
Wow.
And she thanked me for writing that. So, I mean, I'm not going to lie. So I understand why our friends are the way they are, right? So I get that. But at what point are you not broken from this spell? What's happening in Gaza is unimaginable. It's this generation under 30s, the Gaza generation, because they've been watching a live stream. And I will say that to me, it meets the quality. It's definitely an ethnic cleansing. No one can argue with that. I mean, when the President of the United States says we're going to move them to Libya, that is the definition of ethnic cleansing. Moving a population from where they live, you're ethnically cleansing the community. When our Azerbaijan removed the 120,000 Armenians, they ethnically cleansed Artsakh. And the state of Israel, Netanyahu hopes to ethnically cleanse Gaza, but I believe it's also a genocide because it's clear that it's the intent. You can look at the rhetoric, you can look at the behavior. Just 2 weeks ago, the IDF snipers shot holes in the water tanks at Holy Family Church. You can go to vulnerablepeopleproject.com on our video, you can see it. We have the video there of the tanks being shot and the water pouring out. Here's a real, I hate to call this an opportunity for Catholics and Orthodox, but I believe the evangelical church, Christian Zionism, the megachurch movement, dispensationalism will die in Gaza.
Yeah.
No young person is going to cling to this.
Yeah.
They're either going to lose their faith completely, or by God's grace, they discover the fullness of the truth in the church. So one of the reasons I'm obnoxiously loud, I've been writing like a couple columns a week and doing as much media as I can on this, is in a way, I want young Christians to see that there are conservative Christians who are opposed to this.
Yeah.
So that they don't lose their faith.
Let's back up a little bit, because you had told me when I was coming into the church that there would be various things that would change about me. That I wasn't entirely convinced when you said that, but I have since seen that you were right. You did say I would have considered myself a low-grade Christian Zionist when I was a Protestant. But fortunately, my first trip to Israel in 2013 was with an avowedly Christian Zionist group. I didn't know all the dynamics about that part of the world at this point. I still don't claim to know all the dynamics. It's a complex part of the world. But fortunately, and one of my dear friends, Michael Onifer, I'll say his name out loud, a wonderful man. And he taught me from the very, very beginning to have profound and deep empathy for the Palestinians. So while he did believe, or I think still does, and a lot of these people still believe that the Jews have a divine right to be in the Holy Land, even against maybe some others. I won't speak for Michael. I'll just say that's a general Christian Zionist position. Michael taught me have deep sympathy and do things to help Palestinians, especially Palestinian Christians. So I'm very, very thankful that was always part of my introduction to the region. And indeed, on my first trip, I met a wonderful Palestinian who we've been friends, Habibis, right, as the Arabs say, ever since. Mutaz. I won't say his last name for just security reasons, but we're still wonderful friends. We don't talk as much as I'd like, but I saw an amazing, his whole story would be a whole other interview. But my point being that there's always this very deep empathy. So, but let's go back a bit further, because another issue, because you said that religious Zionism would be dropped. You were right. I didn't believe you at the time, but you were right. That's a whole other theological topic. We probably can't do a full deep dive today. But another thing that you were always very strong about was, because I think this is at the root of so much of what we're talking about and why the Christian conservative American electorate is the way it is. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think I would have defended it back in the day for most of my life. I would have said, look, way more Americans would have been killed. Potentially way more Japanese would have been killed because we would have had to invade. That would have been extremely bloody, et cetera, et cetera. Now I see it as Vatican II described it implicitly. It didn't specifically say it out loud, but it described the wholesale slaughter of civilians as an abomination. That's in the Catechism. Vatican II said it, and it gets you said your view on this is going to change, and you were 100% right. And now I see Hiroshima and Nagasaki as, at least, whether intended or not, it was an attempt by the secular world to reset morality itself. That's kind of how I see it, or the non-Christian. It's very disturbing to me, and I think this has become true in light of Gaza, and it really shows the difference between Catholic theology and, frankly, anything else. And it goes right to your philosophy about not being a victimist and being in solidarity with the vulnerable. And I'll connect it with all the sources of the great tradition, even Socrates, even guys who didn't know the incarnate God like Socrates, that they would rather die than do evil, no matter the cost. And this is what the fathers talk about too. The gravity with which our ancestors took sin puts us today to shame as a whole. And so this idea that I will not commit even the smallest evil for the sake of a supposed greater good, that's a profoundly Catholic idea. And so anyway, those are just, it's just interesting how so much of what is happening today is not compared to an unchanging moral law. It's compared to Allied conduct in World War II. It's like, no, I don't consent to that. That is not the standard for conduct in war. Divine and natural law is the standard. So those are just some thoughts for you to interact with. Yeah.
The reason I picked August 6th is my date, Transfiguration. It's also the date the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And I wanted my apostolate as a Catholic. I wanted to work towards the end of abortion, the abolition of strategic nuclear weapons. I am not opposed to tactical nuclear weapons. They can be used in an illicit way.
Sure.
But many of the Catholic, I think all of the Catholic and Republican Army Air Corps staff had already resigned prior to the droppings of the bombs because of the strategic bombing of Europe.
Wow.
And Eisenhower wrote against it. Most of Truman's senior staff in their memoirs condemn it, say it was utterly unnecessary. Obviously, Archbishop Fulton Sheen is a Monsignor. A month and a half after the bomb was dropped, Monsignor Sheen gave a lecture at Catholic University condemning it. And the greatest analytical philosopher in the history of the English-speaking language, Elizabeth Anscombe, a devout Catholic, very pro-life, she protested Truman when he came to Oxford. I believe it was Oxford. And so, we're not the outliers here. And this was not, by the way, whether it was or wasn't, it wasn't necessary to win the war. We just needed to offer them different conditions of surrender that they were ready to take, by the way, which would have been more prudent anyways. And what a lot of people don't know is part of our occupation of Japan was widespread access to abortion.
Really?
Yes, and contraception, which led to the demographic ending of Japan as a country. It's called MacArthur's
Even before
Revenge.
Roe v. Wade?
Oh, in like the 40s and 50s.
Really?
Early 50s, yeah.
I never knew about that. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
And Archbishop Fulton Sheen had said prior to Roe v. Wade that the fruit of the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima would be abortion.
Wow.
And he said that the use of the bomb said there are no limits. There are no more limits to, the use of violence for one's will. And so, of course, this will lead to legal abortion. And this is, Archbishop Fulton Sheen. And when I was in my new book that just came out, I'll plug my new book, Dispatches from the Great Campaign from Sophia Press. I have in there, it's a collection of my essays over 30 years of my work. Our Time Together in Ukraine is there, and but just different articles I wrote from different campaigns. But one of the essays in the book is when my family had to rush into a cave when Hawaii received the incoming ballistic missile alert, if you remember.
Yeah.
And it was for 36 minutes, all of Oahu thought that there were incoming nuclear ICBMs headed towards the state of Hawaii. And on the way back I had a plan. I have a plan for everything. And we had our go bags ready. And within 12 minutes, my family was already on the opposite side of the Waianae Mountains in Pearl Harbor. And we went to a cave that has fresh water, and it's a very deep cave.
You really do have a plan.
I had a plan. And what was weird is a year before that, I was in Iraq with the Kurds as they were in the caves in Iraqi Kurdistan fighting ISIS, but literally a year to the day. But when we were coming back, my young son said we should nuke North Korea off the face of the earth so we don't have to ever experience this. And in that essay that I published, I had a talk with my kids as we were driving home from hiding in a cave on how it's better to suffer evil than to do evil.
Yeah.
And that I would rather, die in a mass atrocity like that than to be responsible for something like that. And that's a hard thing to tell your kids, because you don't want them to think you don't love them, but you want to know you fully love them and that we believe in God and eternity. If I didn't believe in God, well, I'll wipe the whole world off the face of the map to keep my family alive. But I do believe in God. And I do believe that these people have the same inviolable dignity and worth that my family has, that I have. And that's something that our faith, by God's grace, even cultural Catholics seem to have it kind of imprinted in them.
And this, we want to make sure we emphasize to people, this is a hard teaching. This is, and what we're rejecting is called consequentialism. And just to connect it to some of even the church fathers, this voluntary embracing of suffering instead of doing evil. This is what fasting is supposed to be. This is what almsgiving is supposed to be. So, I fully recognize, I'm in a nice home in a beautiful place in California. You're in a nice home. Like, we have a charmed life, as you said, in many, many ways. And so this is one of my more morbid sides. I sometimes think of all the ways I could be physically threatened that would make me apostatize, at least with my mouth. And I pray to our Lord, if that ever happens, please give me the grace to never apostatize. As we've saw some of those, some of those Christian martyrs who had their heads chopped off by ISIS. I mean, it's unimaginable. But this is hard. So I'm under no illusions. Like, I actually think one of my personal tests for wisdom for somebody is ask them how they think they would have been in Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia or the Confederate States with respect to the question of slavery. And if they say that they would have been on the right side, I automatically know they don't know themselves very well. Because maybe they would have been. Some of us would have been. But the likelihood is that we wouldn't have been. We would have been with the majority that went along with the evil. And Moses talks about that. He says, do not go along with the crowd to do evil. Do not go along with the crowd to do evil. That's in the book of Exodus, I think.
And Josh, if we're honest, if you would have asked me, where would I have been in 1934 Germany? Well, how old was I?
Yeah.
Was I 70 or was I 15?
Yeah.
What were my circumstances? Was I poor or was I wealthy? Was I well-formed or was I not? Was I catechized, and was I 60 and had a life of prayer and study and reflection? So now we can look back and say, well, or it's easy for me. I get really angry at my Christian Zionist friends, like very upset and angry. But then I have to remind myself, like, really, since 1989, this is all I do is study and read about and think about and work in and around. I spend a lot of time on prayer and reflection and study to these areas. But what if I had a full-time job and a family, and I was just never thinking about this till Fox News started spoon-feeding, information into my ear. So it's really hard. Those are really strange questions because, it's how old was I? How well-formed was I? What was my station in life?
Yep.
Well, I can tell you, it's easy for me to recognize different stages of my life. I could have easily been swept away, and hopefully now it would be much more difficult for me to be swept away. When I was a young soldier, as soldiers do, and infantrymen, we'd be sitting on a hill somewhere eating MREs, doing hypothetical questions. And one of the questions one time somebody said is, how many civilians would you kill to save one American?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, here we are, young infantrymen. How many civilians would you kill? And some said none, some said 2, some said 5. So I said, I'm like 18. I would kill every civilian in the world to save one American because I'm an American. And I meant it. I meant it. Why? Because young men want to express solidarity with their community, their tribe. They want to show their community how grateful they are and how much they love them. They want to show their country. That's why young men need to be protected from these impulses by rules of engagement and good chains of command, which by God's grace we have, especially at that level, the platoon level and the company and battalion level. We have, great chains of command and great discipline and good rules of engagement. Seems to be the further you get from the ground, the less discipline we seem to have. But I can definitely look at myself and see how easily I could have been swept away.
Well, and this is a constant theme of your work and also our private conversations. We talk about this, like, to show solidarity with the vulnerable obviously has the divine value. It is imitating our Lord's conduct with respect to us. But it also has a very, there are divine benefits from this, but it also has a very practical value. And I think it's that you talk about, and I think I explain this a bit to people, just not getting caught up in ideological fervors. Can you explain this aspect a bit to people?
We're just not being swept away by these.
Yeah, why showing solidarity with the vulnerable would help us, like that approach to life would help us actually not get swept along in favor of slavery or Nazism or Bolshevism or whatever, Maoism or whatever it may be. How this sort of inoculates us against that.
Yeah, it's something I look at even in my work. The biggest fear that I have at the Vulnerable People Project is that our work would have unintended consequences that would cause harm. That's very easy to happen. In fact, a month ago, one of our contractors was killed, a young man in Nigeria defending seminarians. And it went through my mind, if I didn't start my program to defend vulnerable seminarians and priests in hospitals and schools, this young man would be alive for sure. So my decision to set up this program, now maybe he saved 3 seminarians, maybe he didn't, maybe who knows. But it's when my actions can lead to harm, it's something I really worry about. And very early on when I founded VPP, we run very aggressive influence campaigns that I think were pretty effective, and we punch way above our weight. Like, people know about our work and our aid, and they may see my writing, but I think what most of what we do is under the ocean. It's that part of the iceberg that people don't see, where we aggressively and effectively advocate for vulnerable ethnic and religious communities without power. We're pretty good at that. But there's a fear in that. Like, when you're advocating for a community, there are always conflicting interests. And don't want, you're advocating for one community to harm another vulnerable community. One of the things you didn't bring up, but I think you probably remember, is I said you're going to reject your Zionism and you're going to be tempted to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I said you have to reject Zionism while not being tempted to anti-Semitism. Do you remember me saying that?
Yeah, no, I think I did mention that, but yeah, absolutely. And I want to go into that more. Yeah.
And so I'll tell you, even with the Palestinians, it gets to be so complicated. So number one, I get really angry that every time I have to say, maybe we shouldn't starve and target civilians in Gaza, maybe we should be opposed to collective punishment against all peoples. But then we always feel like it's in a form, we have to also say, well, this is leading to an increase in anti-Semitism. And I hate saying that because the Palestinians are an end in themselves. We don't oppose the ethnic cleansing of Gaza because it's going to lead to a rise in anti-Semitism. We oppose what's happening in Gaza because the Palestinians are an end in themselves. But yes, I can see that the actions of the state of Israel will inevitably lead to a rise of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. And when you have powerful interests that are merciless and using everything they can for leverage and power, you see what René Girard would call this mimetic rivalry and this escalation. So we always have to be resist the temptation to engage in this sort of mimetic escalation. And while we should be rightfully concerned about the rise in Jew hatred, one of the best ways we can inoculate our society is by saying that we are always and everywhere against collective punishment. Just always and everywhere.
Yeah.
This is just something we have to say. Whether it's the Semitic Palestinians or the Semitic Jews, we're against, and there seems to be this mystery of collective punishment of Semites is okay. One side says collective punishment of Jews is okay. One says it's the collective punishment of Palestinians is okay. So, but it is this delicate balance when you share what the state of Israel's doing, and God forbid when this war ends and people really begin to see what's been happening in Gaza, it's going to be fertile. It's going to be fertile ground for those who want to harness pain and suffering and anger for giving it utility and leveraging it against Jews. Yeah.
Let's put a few preliminaries on the table, if that's all right. You've already mentioned it. This shouldn't have to be said, but it does in the current environment we're in. So let's just say it. October 7th was horrific. It was evil. Because I had listened to your lessons so fervently for so many years, I didn't think, let's flatten Gaza right afterward. But I thought something very different. But in many ways, that was the result of you and how your thought and witness helped inebriate me against this sort of, I would describe it as a sort of neo-pagan American imperialism, frankly, that we can do what we want to get our intended end. And maybe sometimes those ends are good. Imperial Japan was a demonic foe. Nazi Germany was a demonic foe. And I also want to give the devil his due. Some of these are hard issues. And I do think, in my experience, this would be another episode, another interview, but I have had experiences where I've been on the ground in the Holy Land, and I have seen the state of Israel lied about, and I know you have as well. So I know that sometimes these are morally ambiguous things. You know, if Hamas is in fact putting their munitions in a hospital or something like that, sometimes there can be morally ambiguous things. And so I'm not denying that. So Hamas is a satanic organization. You and I both believe that. The hostages should be released. Like all these things, we stand in solidarity with our Jewish friends and neighbors. We don't want them to be oppressed. We don't want them to be murdered. None of that. But I think when it gets to this whole consequentialism thing in Gaza, what disturbed me from the very, very beginning, I see a lot of this from Israeli figures, and frankly, from a lot of Christians. It'd be like, what Hamas did was so evil, so wicked. I'm with them so far. Therefore, whatever comes next is on them. I'm like, now you've lost me. Now you've lost me. Because that's essentially an admission, or an assertion rather, that I get to be a beast now because I was treated in a beastly fashion. That's essentially abdicating all moral responsibility for your own actions in response to a grievance inflicted on you by an enemy, which nothing is more anti-Christic than that. And I mean that quite literally. Like, our Lord and Savior taught us to love your enemies and pray for them. That doesn't mean we don't resist them. That doesn't mean we don't defend ourselves. But it does mean that, again, as we said earlier, we never inflict evil in response to evil, ever. The Christian, and this is hard. I am not putting myself out there, and I don't think you would. I am not the example here. I can, even as I'm saying these things, I have a deep awareness that, boy, I hope if push really came to shove, I could live this out. I could live out like Christ in this regard, because this is hard. So no cheap moralism here. No, that's not my intention. But we would rather suffer evil than inflict evil. And so that was what I was seeing with so much of this Zionism in response to what happened in Gaza is whatever happens next, that's on them. And I just find that reprehensible and wicked.
Yeah, the line, they voted for Hamas. They all voted for Hamas, when only 6% of people living in Gaza voted for Hamas. The last election was a generation ago. 50% wasn't born. Well over 50% wasn't old enough to vote. They never got a majority of the vote in any electoral district. Yeah. So it breaks down to about 6% voted for Hamas. But even if a woman went to vote for Hamas, you don't get to target her. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's like you say like you took my lessons and so you didn't have that volatile response. Like most of my study and prayer is I've had the same prayer since the day I believed in God. God, make me kind, humble, gentle, and chaste. And God is patient in those prayers, But then, like what you said earlier is, I thank God that I have this kind of volatile. You've seen it, like you saw me in Ukraine. Like I get heated, and when people are with me in sort of my work in these conflict zones, my staff goes, "You go from Saint Jason to like this crazed samurai Jason. Who's this guy?" And I can kind of go back and forth. But I thank God for that because I can kind of understand. And I don't see any of the entities involved as demonic. I run an apostolate. You may remember this when we were in Ukraine and there was this T-72 and I had looked sad. I don't know if you remember this. And I had said to our Ukrainian friends, like, what are you thinking?
In the square, the one in the public square?
Yeah. And I said, I'm thinking that I'm thinking of the boys that died in this thing. And then how did their family find out? And our friend said, well, they're Russian boys. I said, you may not believe this because I'm here to support the people of Ukraine, but through the nature of my work, I worked in apostolate. We're on a battlefield. We serve everyone on the battlefield. When you're a combat medic, you serve everyone on the battlefield. When you run a human rights organization, and I'll never forget when the movie star Eduardo Verástegui and I and some friends were in Sudan during the genocide, and we met with the Janjaweed. The devils on horseback, Al Qaeda Sudan. Yeah, we met with
who are Janjaweed? Who? What is that?
They were it means devils on horseback. They were an Al Qaeda affiliate that were perpetrating a genocide. And I went to meet with them, and I thought I was just going to be angry and just And we go to meet with them, and I had said they were really kind of gruff with us at first and accusing us of being things we're not. And they go, why are you here? And I said, well, we're here to ask you to stop attacking our friends on the other side of the river. And can we bring you medicine for your children? Because they had parasites and we wanted to drill the wells for you. But if you could promise not to attack. And in Arabic, the one guy said to the guy behind him, God sent him because only God can make a man love his enemy. And I can tell he loves us. Our interpreter told us this on the truck ride back because it was getting because then the guy that said this to the other Janjaweed guy, he yelled at him and they're fighting. It's a little scary when you're in the middle of Sudan.
Yeah.
Guys with AK-47s are yelling at each other. You know what they're saying.
Yeah.
But I was like grateful that this guy saw that we cared for his children.
Wow.
And I went there thinking of him as a devil, but he was a victim of the human condition. Hannah Arendt has been someone who's made such a great impact on me, the beautiful, wonderful, most beautiful thinker of the 20th century, a Jewish emigre who barely escaped the Gestapo, was betrayed by her lover, Heidegger, who was also her teacher. So she had the personal betrayal. Her country betrayed her. Then she felt her own Jewish community betrayed her when she wrote honestly about the Eichmann trial. And so Hannah Arendt has really helped me view these actors in these catastrophes with more charity. While recognizing
explain it a bit to people
the banality of evil, that they're just swept away by these contagions. They're thoughtless. They're just trying to be liked. They're just trying to get a promotion. They're just trying to go home with as little effort as possible through the workday. When you understand that, when you understand that they have their realities, the way that Palestinian woman in a basement of a building in Cairo where we were filming her expressed empathy for the IDF soldier who literally shattered her statues of Mary, smashed her crucifix, and danced around on social media in her underwear. She really felt sorry for him.
Yeah.
And René Girard said, when these violent contagions sweep through our community, everyone has the same response. I thought we were different. And I will say with Gaza, there are people that I love. I thought we were different. The sort of the callousness, the viciousness, to hear a U.S. congressman talk about dropping atomic bombs on a narrow civilian population, to see U.S. politicians going to sign bombs that are killing mostly civilians and like Nikki Haley put on it, finish them.
Wow.
It's really heartbreaking. And this is where, to me, this is the great campaign. This is the great evangelization that we have to do, is that we really need as Catholics to communicate to these other ecclesial communities a deep love of the human person. And we need to inspire solidarity with the outcast. That's the gospel. There's only two ways to order your family. Either the strong members of your family exploit the weak. It's the only way you can order a community too, a town, a country, or a world order. And I believe that a Christian world order, I call it anthropological integralism, and we have our integralism battles, is ordering the world around those with wealth and power and prestige, leveraging it for the outcast, for the poor, and for the weak. The opposite of that is It's satanic. I mean, it is a satanic world order that exploits the vulnerable and the poor and the weak. And right now in Congo, there are Catholic children digging for cobalt by hand for your electric panels, for your car, for your solar, or for your Tesla. You have the Uyghur knitting together our clothes so you can go on these websites and be so excited you get a dress for $9. Like now we have the whole world seems powerless to stop the Hunger Games of Gaza. It's really like that movie Hunger Games, where we're live streaming children having to run through the streets and dodge bullets just to get bags of flour. And so we have a world order that is based on this strong, and unfortunately we see a lot of this now in MAGA expressing itself, that just a brazen, shameless, we are powerful and we will leverage our wealth and our power and our prestige at the expense of the vulnerable. When I think what is manly, a manly Christianity, not a muscular Christianity, but a calloused hands Christianity, is radical solidarity with the poor. Whether it's going to play chess on Wednesdays at the old folks' home, or fixing the broken door at the local pregnancy center, whatever it is that we're doing in our life for our community as Catholics, it should be serving the most vulnerable members of our family and our community. And as a church, through our apostolates, we should be looking, what are the most vulnerable communities in the world? St. Maximilian Kolbe in the 20s in Poland, the poor Polish people had missions in India, Africa, all over Asia, China, and Japan, building churches and building schools and building hospitals. Archbishop Fulton Sheen, 100% of the money that he made off of all of his media in his entire career was to go to the persecuted church around the world. Now, our grandparents and great-grandparents who came out of the Depression and came out of World War II, they could tithe to support the persecuted church around the world. But today, when we are the wealthiest, most privileged Christians, we feel as if we no longer have any sort of responsibility to be in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Christ. And Fulton Sheen said that the mystical body of Christ is best represented when one Christian in one part of the world serves and loves one Christian in the other part of the world. And today, the oldest Christian community in the world, the Christian community in the West Bank and in Gaza, is being starved, bombed, beaten. A good friend of mine, Palestinian Christian in Bethlehem, she's been beaten, her homes have been destroyed, and just 2 days ago, settlers killed her dog. It's just endless. But so many Christians are fearful to speak up. They're fearful to speak up on this. You just had Marco Rubio go on Raymond Arroyo's EWTN. He talked about the persecuted church all around the world, but he failed to mention the persecuted church in Gaza and the West Bank. I was at the International Religious Freedom Conference several years ago. Everyone there spoke on China's persecution of religion. The official spokesperson for the church that was there at the time didn't address the CCP at all, didn't mention it once. When meanwhile, Jimmy Lai had just been arrested, Cardinal Zen's been persecuted, and over 10 bishops have been disappeared, not to mention thousands and thousands of Catholic lay people, 3 million Uyghur in concentration camps. What we need to do as Catholics is speak up for those that no one else will speak up for. If there's a chorus, I have a bad voice. Why would I lend my weak voice to a chorus? But if no one's speaking up in my shrill, horrible voice, I can speak up.
Well said. A few theological points based on what you're describing is you're talking about those in power exploiting the vulnerable, and it made me think of Satan, who, as an angelic being at a higher intellect and as pure spirit, he was in the hierarchy of being a higher than humans, and yet he exploited Adam and Eve in the garden, beginning with Eve and then moving on to Adam, for his own purposes. So it when you're describing it as satanic, this is not some idle theorizing on your part. It's literally what happened and what led to the fall of our entire race. And then, of course, you have the exact opposite with our Lord. Just a quick reflection, because I think there are some beautiful, wonderful Protestants who do know what it's like, the sort of embracing of suffering that's present in the Catholic faith and church. So those people are absolutely there. But I will say my experience and the experience of so many converts from Protestantism that I know, which in many ways is a conversion from Americanism in a way, a sort of belief in a sort of American supremacy in all things. The embrace of the Catholic doctrine of redemptive suffering, it has made the gospel so much more beautiful, but so much more radical. And that's why I think it's so important that we're talking about a lot of issues that I don't normally talk about on this podcast, but we're going to do this every now and then because I think it's very important. One of the purposes of Eternal Christendom that we have on the website is we want people to become, remain, and deepen their lives as Catholics, hidden with Christ in God, which is quoting Colossians 3:3. And what I've had to realize becoming Catholic, and what you have realized, and all of us need to realize, is that there is no better place to be hidden with Christ in God than on the cross. And that means exactly what you're talking about, embracing the vulnerable, no matter who they are, and no matter the false, slanderous allegation. It was funny, earlier in the interview, you mentioned paying for armed guards to protect a synagogue before we even got into Gaza. And how many times have you been accused of anti-Semitism because of your stance on Gaza?
To be honest,
I've been accused of the same thing.
Maybe publicly, somebody just yesterday.
Yeah.
I wasn't even talking about it. I was just posted a video of me delivering aid into Gaza, and someone put anti-Semite. I'm like, okay, that's weird. But but no one's really accused me out loud or to my face. But I wonder how many of my friends who are Jewish, who are Zionists, have some sort of feeling that I hate them or that I betrayed them or.
But you made an interesting point to me that I don't think you'll mind me mentioning in public, and if you do, we'll edit it out. But it was, we were talking about this a few months ago, and you were saying, with respect to Gaza, the state of Israel has become the enemy. And obviously there are wicked people on the other side too. But you said, but I think tomorrow you and I are more likely to be martyred by Jew haters, and we'll have to stand up to them tomorrow. And can you expand on that a little bit? Just whatever thoughts, because I think this is very important, because I think you and I are very, very united on this, that we deny a religious Zionism that says if you are Jewish, you automatically have some sort of tenancy right to the Holy Land, especially contrary to Palestinians, Arab Palestinians. But we also see a rising Jew hatred that is very concerning. So just what are your general thoughts on this issue?
Well, the pendulum never stays in Normalville for very long. It goes back and forth.
That is well said. That is well said.
So you can just see which way the pendulum is beginning to swing, and there's going to be people. I don't want to be even further. I see Zionism as ethno-nationalist, as racist. Yeah. I recognize the state of Israel as an apartheid state. It is. I mean, it is whether you think that it has to be. for the survival of the Jewish people or not, then you have to make that case. But I don't think we can deny that it's an ethno-nationalist apartheid state. But that being said, by the way, all the borders in the Middle East are just arbitrary.
Yeah.
You had the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. You had the Sykes-Picot Agreement. You had the Balfour Declaration. You have all these borders being drawn willy-nilly, not for the benefit of the indigenous people there, but for the benefit of the colonial powers. And that goes for not just the state of Israel, but all of the other states. And half of the Jews in Israel are from Iraq, and they're from Yemen, and they're from Morocco, and they're from the region. They're from Ethiopia. So the idea that everyone there is just, from Brooklyn, Ukraine, or Russia is not true either. And there are communities of Jews that in the post 1949 world, 48 world, where can they go? Where can they go? Even if they were, so it is a very complex and complicated reality that is beyond that of a Catholic apostolate. And I do write on my suggestions, like I think we should look to Switzerland, to the Canton model, to decentralize all of these countries because their borders are just so ridiculous. They don't really seem to make sense, that they're just doomed. And if you have Western powers like with Timber Sycamore fueling violence and funding extremists, how can there be any hope for them?
Yeah.
But if we really want what's best for the people of the region, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Alawites, Yazidis, Kakai, and the beautiful diverse community that there's there, we just have to recognize every community is an end in themselves, that we don't believe in collective punishment, that we should be honest with what our goals are. And but yeah, I do think when the world begins to see what has happened in Gaza, it will be very easy to harness for political purposes Jew hatred. And when you have Zionists that are not bashful in trying to destroy people who oppose their project, there are going to be those who are really tempted to an equal or greater power that's going to be on the rise. And so only really through faith and discipline and humanity and charity can people resist that. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this all unfolds. You can see some people that were on the hard right and were kind of spouting bigoted things 3 years ago moving to the middle. You can see those that were political opportunists they were toward the middle and are moving to the extremist right when it comes to hateful and bigoted language. Again, we've become as Catholics so used to bigoted language towards Latinos that are Catholic. We were shocked when Ambassador Huckabee just kind of disparaged the Irish with his tweet a couple weeks ago.
Oh, I didn't see this.
Oh yeah, when Ireland put on sanctions on the settlements, he said that the country of Ireland had fallen into a vat of Guinness and is drunk, and the Irish need to sober up with his government X account.
Yeah.
And for Irish Catholics, that's an old trope to have an Englishman, an Anglo-American with an English last name spouting anti-pirate, Irish tropes. It's a bit startling. But then you have the head of the Babylon Bee say that the descendants of the Jews that accepted Jesus in Gaza aren't real Christians. So the best.
Let me say something about that really. Sorry to interrupt, but this is important because I want to give credit where credit's due. We did a great rosary campaign recently. The guy you're talking about, Babylon Bee, is Joel Berry. Okay. I haven't told you this yet, so the first time you're hearing about it is on this public interview. Joel messaged me privately, and he said, "Thank you for your prayers and for caring about my soul." And he was open to a discussion. So
you're a better man than me. I just wanted to punch him in the face, but that's good.
Oh, that desire was there. Don't get me. But it's a quiet. Keep it a quiet voice, Jason. That's what you got to do. You got to keep.
That's the first thought, and I go, "How dare you think that?"
Yeah. No, I couldn't stand what he said. But I want to give him public credit, and I hope we get to chat and figuring out. I don't fully know his intentions, and I'm hoping he's in good faith. But I will say his message struck me as very genuine, and this is why I constantly tell people. I know you and I both have a deep, deep love for Our Lady. we are not the one who converts. Like I think in your work, I mean, what you were describing with that Al-Qaeda guy in Sudan is extraordinary. Like he recognized that only God, like this genocidal Al-Qaeda guy, realizes only God can cause a man to love his enemy. It's like, wow, that's like how many theologians have to grasp in the dark before they realize this reality. And yet this genocidal Al-Qaeda guy in Sudan realizes it because of you manifesting, a mini incarnation in front of him. And so I've just seen this. This is why one other theological observation I'll connect with this. You were talking about that Palestinian woman expressing empathy for the IDF soldier. That made me, I'm forgetting who it was and where I found it, but I remember reading A Desert Father, where a desert father like broke out into tears when one of the young brothers fell into sin. And like he was more interested in grieving over him and helping to heal him than chastising him because of his sin, which, there wouldn't have been a problem with chastising him. There's a place for discipline. But it just struck me that this holy hermit in the deserts of Egypt was struck by compassion to the point of weeping for a brother who had fallen into sin. And it strikes me as a similar sort of empathy as what that Palestinian woman expressed for the IDF soldiers. So when we're praying, when we're asking Our Lady and the saints to join us, and we are asking for supernatural things that go completely beyond our ability to do. And so, yeah, thank God Joel Berry reached out, and please be praying for that discussion.
No,
what were you going to say?
And that's wonderful, because it is important that we're vigilant in not letting these people be dehumanized, or when they say, oh, there's no civilians in Gaza. Well, of course there's civilians in Gaza. What are you talking about? The idea that you can target anyone. So we need to be vigilant. And I do think that, I don't know how Joel Berry and Huckabee and others, or the Speaker of the House, who just
went to the Wailing Wall,
went to the settlements and told the settlers that were attacking Christians, like, keep going, like, it's yours, this is yours, God gave this to you. And these settlers were attacking Christians. So
just to be precise, he wasn't telling them to attack Christians, but I know you weren't saying this, but that the land is theirs by divine right. And so he's kind of giving a free pass to what's happening.
Boko Haram, if an American politician went and told Boko Haram that was attacking Christians, like, well, that's your land.
Yeah.
That's really startling. And so to think that the Speaker of the House, who's from Louisiana, probably not the best state to decide to do that from, goes and tells settlers that it just killed an American 2 weeks ago and have been brutally attacking Catholic community. Well, that's your land. The idea, this ethno-nationalist heresy that's really repugnant, this idea that the descendants of the Jews that accepted Jesus don't have a right to their land because they accepted Jesus.
Yeah.
If they would have never accepted Jesus, they could live there.
Well, you and we're running up against some time limits for you and for me for this interview, but that's, I think, going into the heresy of Christian Zionism, and I have no qualms about calling it a heresy. I'll admit, full cards on the table. It can be uncomfortable for me sometimes because I have dear Jewish friends who I love deeply. I hope I would lay down my life for them if they were ever persecuted, and I know you feel the exact same way. I love them deeply. But I have to state the truth as best I see it, especially when people are suffering and dying because of it. And we'll need to unpack that further because there are a lot of disturbing things going on. Yeah.
And I'll just say one thing about Christian Zionism.
Yeah.
It's not really, I don't see it as a heresy. I see it as apostasy. Because if you deny that Jesus is the fulfillment of all the promises to Abraham. All Christians believe that until the late 19th century. And now it's really only a relatively small group of very influential Christians in the Anglosphere that believe that. I always saw it as an apostasy. I never spoke aloud about that. But when I see how this, if we'll call it a heresy, this ideology leads people to justify the ethnic cleansing of a whole people. And I've heard famous Christian Zionist pastors talk about the reincarnation of Amalekites, as if the Palestinians are a reincarnation of a people to punish the Israelis for not killing them the first time, and now they have to kill them. It's very dangerous. It's very virulent. These books you can find are bestsellers in your local Barnes & Noble or Christian bookstore. I call it the pumpkin spice Gestapo. You know, they have their pumpkin spice tea and their little book with a glossy cover. But when you crack the book, it's really the most repugnant genocidal rhetoric. Just, it's simple. But for us, it's almost been the Left Behind book series fairy tale fantasy. So now these are like LARPers, like it's like live action role playing genocide. Like it's a fantasy football, like the IDF is your fantasy football team and they're ethnically cleansing Gaza. So as Catholics, we have to be especially vigilant because there are co-religionists that are dying.
And isn't that like just part of the great, you and I talk about this a lot in private too, just the great, and it's more in my mind lately, how grotesquely evil we become because of the virtualization of the world. Like war is a game. It's like this thrill we get to experience on social media instead of this reality where people are dying, their limbs are being blown off. People's parents are, they're losing the most beloved people in their life. And it's like a sort of casual approach to violence. And it's really, it like makes so many people barbarians without them even realizing it.
Well, that's why I want to commend you when I really wanted you to come to Ukraine with me.
Yeah.
I've invited 1,000 people on these trips with me. You are the only person to have come.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah.
Only. Everyone quits.
Wow.
Everyone. Oh, I forgot I had a dentist appointment that week. Oh, I forgot. Always something comes up. And I really wanted you to come. And I remember my wife being so mad at me. She's like, "You can't have him go with you." I'm like, "What? I can die, but Josh can't?" What?
I'm a bachelor. Yeah.
She was so mad at me because I don't know if you remember. We like, we get. My wife's like, "You and your friends, like, you guys argue a lot. Like, we're passionate,
Yeah.
So we were having passionate conversations about Ukraine, and I'd asked you to come with me, and you came. And it's hard to come back and just listen to people have casual conversations when, like, you and I went through a town and we walked over mass graves.
Yeah.
And we went to a hospital where every room was filled with amputees of young boys, or we spoke on a stage with a very handsome movie star, good looks, devout Catholic young man who was the leader of the pro-life movement in Ukraine. And then I think it was 7 days after we spoke, he was a special forces soldier. He died on the Eastern Front there.
Yeah.
And then when you come back and you just watch the talking heads on television or even your friends on Facebook, they talk about these things with such certainty and at the same time such aloofness.
Yeah.
It's hard to take, but then you have to remind yourself, these wars, this is just television to them. These are just pixels on a screen, and so the advantage of the work that I do, the privilege and maybe the struggle is you can never, my wife always says, "You have to go this time." And I never have to go. I manage people. But I say it's important that I go so I don't forget.
Yeah.
That I know. That I'm not a do-gooder.
Yeah.
That I have skin in the game. Even if the skin in the game is just a broken heart.
Yeah, that's well said. Skin in the game is really important. Yeah.
You had to go into bomb shelters. That was different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I had to do the same when I was in Israel. I did a summer in Israel for a legal internship, and the house I was renting had a bomb shelter, which increased my empathy for Israelis that prior to this had to face rocket attack and whatnot. And I was just going to say that some of the best and most beautiful conversations I've had with people on both sides of this conflict in the Holy Land have been facilitated by beautiful Jewish souls and beautiful Palestinian souls who are willing to look at people not as an abstract representation of their group, but as, like you said, a beautiful soul made in the image of God who has a duty to love God and love neighbor and figure out how we do that. How do we do that? And willing to suffer calumny from their own community in order to figure out how best to ensure that they will one day hear, well done, good and faithful servant, from the only voice that really matters, you know? And so I think it's a good place to end. If there's any final thoughts that you have, this has been such an honor to have you. We've been wanting to do it for a while. We're going to do it more. I really want people to know about your work and to become monthly patrons if they're willing, because, you know, you guys have stuff come up all the time. And I know as us as a small apostolate, you know, to whatever degree we can, to have a consistent budget that we know we're dealing with, and we can kind of make up the difference with larger gifts. It's really helpful. It's really helpful. So give people your website one more time.
Yeah, vulnerablepeopleproject.com. And if you go become a monthly donor right now at vulnerablepeopleproject.com or vppbook.com as well, you get my latest book, Dispatches from the Great Campaign, and you become a monthly donor. You know, right now we're increasing our armed guards presence in front of vulnerable parishes in Nigeria. As fast as we can fundraise, we're growing our teams there. I'll be in Nigeria most of September. This week I said yes. They had baby formula available for Gaza. I said, how much do you have? I said, I'll buy all of it. I don't even have all the money yet, but by God's grace, we always do come through. And, but yeah, when you know, and you can go to our website and you know, Josh, but if you can see what we do, we document everything we do. And our mission is truly to stand with the most vulnerable people in the world when it's difficult, from the child in the womb to the child in Gaza. I want to share one more story about you. Just your good Jewish
absolutely.
friends, your good Palestinian friends. This August 3rd, I was in Lincoln, Nebraska for the Yazidi Genocide Remembrance. And I spent a lot of time with the Yazidi community over the years, and I feel very close to this community. But they're really an insular community. And with my work all over the world, I'm drinking tea until the sun rises, right? With my Muslim friends, Jewish friends, Christian friends. But I never really had one of these all-nighters with tea with the Yazidi community. And the Yazidi I have really traditionally been seen as one of the most unusual and mysterious and culturally distinct, if not the most culturally distinct community in the world. And ethnically, they're the proto-Semitic people. Jews, Arabs, and Kurds descend from them. And it's probably right to assume that genetically they're the closest people in the world to Abraham.
I was going to say, yeah.
They're pre-Abrahamic, right?
Yeah.
But they're really culturally distinct and mysterious to even Middle Easterners. But I got to, just this past week, I was with my friends and the only non-Yazidi there, and we were just drinking tea and talking till the sun rose. And it just reminded me of, this is just like when I'm with my family, or when I'm with my Jewish friends, or my Shia friends, or my Sunni friends, or I'm in izakaya in Japan with my Japanese friends. And it's just, we are so different culturally, but really, it as you said, we're a family. We are the human family, and the mystical body of Christ. It is our job to serve them and to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. And we cannot allow ourselves to be swept away by the prejudices and bigotries and even the interests of our political communities, where they contradict the divine will. And that's why I'm so grateful to be Catholic, because I don't see how outside of the church that one could really resist these violent winds of ideology and interest, these violent enthusiasms. And so I am really grateful to be a part of a church where everyone on earth looks Catholic.
Yeah,
like our church looks like the world looks like our church.
Yep.
And there are members of the mystical body of Christ that speak every language. And this should inoculate us from all these cruelties and hatreds and bigotries. And what a privilege it is that we have to, with and through Christ and through his mystical body, the mystical body of Christ, that we have to serve those the world has forgotten. And you think of like Saint Damien, who sailed across the world to serve lepers and die.
Yeah.
Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who wrote eloquently against Zionism and aggressively against Zionism. But then, because of his opposition to the Nazi party and his hiding of Jews in his monasteries, it led to him dying in a starvation bunker in Auschwitz. Or Franz Jägerstätter, who just wouldn't kneel before the Third Reich. We have these great examples. Tagashi Nagai is another great example, this great Japanese blessed on his way to sainthood. So we're blessed to have examples throughout history and from around the world on how we can live our very simple vocation, which is very simple but not easy, to love God and love our neighbor. Like, that's all we're called to do. It's very hard, but very simple.
Well, and that gets me to a final ask I want to make of the audience who've stuck with us. And the ask is not to agree with everything that you have said or I have said per se. That's not the ask in my mind. The ask is, or the real reason I want you on is because I don't want the great tradition, this great inheritance from Greek reason and philosophy, Roman law and institutions, Jewish revelation, obviously fulfilled and completed in the Messiah. This cannot, especially in the days we're in, it cannot be abstract. And it requires sacrifice. It requires taking up a cross and following him. And I am trying to figure out every day how to do that more. And there's like more layers that God is showing me all the time. You've got to have more detachment here. You've got to embrace more suffering here. I mean, all the time. If your heart is open, your eyes are open, your ears are open, God will show you how you are not yet fully taking up the cross of his son. But as it says in our website, we want people to become, remain, and deepen their lives as Catholics, hidden with Christ in God. Again, there's no place to be hidden with Christ more than the cross. And so find out what that cross is. Bear voluntary suffering through fasting, penance, almsgiving, prayer. And I think to the extent we do that, our view of the world and of our neighbor will be transfigured, and we won't be able to go back. And that's why I'm so thankful for your witness and your work, Jason. It's had a profound effect on me. And I hope through this interview and hopefully future interviews, it'll have a profound effect on others.
Thanks for having me on, sir.
Yeah, we'll close with our normal anthem verse, Psalm 73, 25 through 26. Who have I in heaven but you? And on earth I desire nothing besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but the Lord is the strength of my heart and my portion forever.